well, but please, any of your Q&A type, please do use the Zoom Q&A panel. One question we've been asked is, um, will we be sharing the recordings? No. So this is a live virtual workshop. So like we won't be sharing the recordings, but you will get the deck that we are using today afterwards. So what is the goal of this implementation expert workshop? Again, it's high level. It's like, maybe like you already have your data cloud certifications and you're maybe on a project, or you might get one. It's like, how do we make you successful in your data cloud implementation? So really this workshops tries to sort of focus on a few different things. One is, how do you recognize those best fit implementation use cases? Second is, we'll talk about some best practices and considerations, and they can be implementation best practices as well as architectural best practices. Like, we'll also kind of talk about some key different scenarios, as well as how do you go about problem solving. And then a thing that's on top of mind for a lot of us, really, in this new world of more of credit consumption, really, how do you design solutions sort of keeping data cloud credits in mind? And then last but not the least is, at the end of this workshop, we will give you time to take the implementation expert quiz that will be through PLC. Again, like, we want you to succeed. So we'll give you time in this workshop, and that's what qualifies you to be an implementation expert. Now, first, some intros. My name is Arvind Raman, based in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm in our partner enablement team, basically helping drive data cloud and now Agentforce enablement as well. I've been at Salesforce now, it's my 17th year, and I spent a good chunk of my time in the services world helping implement our Salesforce and our marketing cloud solutions back in the days. Matt, like, you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, hi everybody. Nice to see you all here. Matt Wash, I also work with Arvind in partner enablement, and I've been at Salesforce now for about 2.5 years. Previously, I was in the partner space myself, helping implement marketing cloud personalization, and so I really understand very, closely that partner challenge in being able to, fulfill the promises that are being made by Salesforce. It's a big job. And what we do day in, day out, is I would also say that we are your advocates. We're your advocates in terms of understanding the latest capabilities and features of our products, making sure that they're really well translated for our partners, such as yourselves, and also being a point of feedback back to our product team. So when you're out in the field, you're encountering things, and you want to be able to make sure that your experiences are well heard and translated. We're there for you. So we help in both those aspects.
Awesome. So so here's our high level agenda today. We will sort of kick off with some high level intros, and then we really start to kind of dive into how do you identify and craft those use cases. Then we will talk about some discovery best practices. Like, as you're in an implementation, how do you go through either business or technical or data discovery? And then we will talk about some implementation considerations. Again, this is not meant to be a be all and end all, but just some key themes that we have seen over the last 4 years in data cloud implementation on what those key considerations are. And then we'll take a quick break for about 10 minutes, I think. And then we will kind of dive into what are those architectural considerations, especially as we look at some of our newer capabilities like zero copy and DevOps processes and unstructured data and data cloud one and governance. And then we will kind of talk about our consumption model and credit, like how do you estimate it, as well as how do you design your solutions to optimize it. Then we will give you some time to take the quiz, and then we will wrap up. So why are we doing this, right? So as you know, if you're here, like, you're a partner, so this year, so the Salesforce Partner Navigator program has been around for quite some time, but this year we launched an entirely brand new distinction called as an implementation expert. So this workshop and the quiz that goes along with it qualifies you, for that distinction. But beyond that, like our goal is also how do we make you successful in your implementations, right? So apart from being able to uh, drive that, so here's what so if you have not seen this, so this is at a company level or at a partner firm level. So if you have 10 different individuals who have the data cloud implementation expert designation, as well as having done, I think it's 5 projects and with the CSAT score, right? So basically, this workshop and the quiz that go along with it will qualify you towards that. And then obviously you're here for data cloud, but the implementation expert program is there for all of our prioritized Salesforce products. So I think right now we have about 23 of these. So here are the products that your company can earn the distinction. So I mean, if there's one takeaway, like I want you to sort of keep in mind is apart from one of the other qualifying criteria is also to be able to, or you should submit your project within the Salesforce partner portal. So that's the one thing that I'm going to ask back to you so that you take back to your project management and to your firm to just make sure that you're submitting those projects in a timely manner to Salesforce. So what is a data cloud implementation expert? So this is a brand new navigator status that really showcases your competency in data cloud implementations, right? So it really, as customers or even Salesforce AEs look at which partners do we engage with, this really gives you that expertise lens, right? So it kind of talks about how do you go about crafting those use cases? How do you do effective discovery? Look at those architecture and implementation patterns, as well as what those possible pitfalls could be. And then here's what I covered, like at a practice level requirements. Like I think we may have reduced these. Now I think it's 5 projects that you need to uh, have for this product in our partner portal. All right. So how do you get to that implementation expert status? Again, here's you. One is step one, you attend our workshop, which all of you all are doing right now. And then, step two is to be able to pass the quiz, which you will get time for towards the end of the workshop. So this is a data cloud implementation expert workshop. I wanted to, like really in this day of this agentic world, really like how does data cloud really fuel an agent force, right? So hopefully you have seen this diagram or this sort of chart that talks about how the Salesforce platform brings together data plus the customer 360 plus agent force and trust. But if you see, data cloud is that foundational data layer that really fuels and drives the Salesforce 360 across all our apps, including agent force. So really, how does data cloud work, right? I mean, it really it lets you it unlocks all of your enterprise data. It with a unified and harmonized data model, but really as time has evolved, even though these graphics look the same, like this evolve, right? So really at first, step one is we let you connect all of your data, right? So, so we have standard connectors to all the Salesforce clouds. We have connectors to, we have a web SDK, mobile SDK, also being able to connect to any of your in-house systems. So we have over 200 plus connectors. And now with our zero copy partner network, we can connect to any cloud data lake like Snowflake, Databricks, without having to physically copy the data over. And once you have all that, once you connect all that data, you can like we say, you can harmonize them and unify them. And what we say by harmonization is how do you map them into a unified uh, the data model, or what we call as the customer 360 data model. And really, and that's important. Why is that? As you may know, data comes with different shapes, different formats. Like even within Salesforce, within our CRM instance, I'm a contact. Within Marketing Cloud, I'm a subscriber. Within Commerce Cloud, I'm a profile. So how do you take these data with different naming syntaxes, different shapes, and map them into a standard model? And once you do that, you can start to unify them. And by unification, like we mean a process of what we call as uh, identity resolution. And then really this is the third sort of new pillar that's really come in, like in the last few months about governance, right? So now, how do you really govern your data, right? And that's through our classification rules, being able to apply role-based or access policies, as well as data masking, and really how do you it's not just about bringing your data in and harmonizing it uniform, but also being able to apply governance on top of it. Like that's going to be key as well, especially in this agentic world where even agents are going to access and be working with your data. So now that you have all your harmonized, unified, and data that's has the right governance policy, you can start to act on them, right? And by act, it can be you can activate them. They can be used by your agents as well as in different apps. You can create insights of them. So really, this at a very high level, 10,000 foot view is how Data Cloud works. But before we do that, let's kind of, a question. I am going to kick off a question. Yeah. So question one, is Data Cloud required to activate Agent Force? Now you might say, hey, what does that mean, right? I mean, it can be taken, but just based on what you see, is Data Cloud required to activate Agent Force? And I see there's some, I think once we get to that 100 response, and the answer is yes, you do need Data Cloud to activate Agent Force. But now, let me sort of is a data. Let me sort of take it a step. And that's why I said that last statement can lead to many different interpretations. So think of Data Cloud as the platform that is just there, and that is what is driving Agent Force, right? In terms of what you're doing with it. Now, let me ask it a different way. Is a Data Cloud implementation required to activate or use an Agent Force? All right. Once I get to that 100 mark, I am going to, and this was sort of leading the witness, and the answer is no. You don't need to do a full-blown Data Cloud implementation to actually use Agentforce, but Data Cloud, the platform, is there. So what does it really mean, right? So how does Data Cloud power Agentforce, right? There are many different sort of pillars, but really high level, right? So if you're trying to use for grounding your data, using our data graphs capability, that's one. Second big is one is like anytime you are using any of the unstructured data capabilities for RAG purposes. So RAG, which stands for retrieval augmented generation. So either you are, if you use even Agentforce data libraries, as well as uploading or injecting or inserting PDF documents from an external file storage in that is being powered by Data Cloud. So Data Cloud has a built-in vector database where then you can start to come in there and apply chunking policies in terms of how do you index them, how do you encode or transcribe them, so all that is being powered by Data Cloud. And then the third one is a big is which is what we call as audit and feedback. So this is so when your end users or your are working with your agent, so any of the audit and feedback. So think of the thumbs up, thumbs down, as well as being able to all that is getting stored in Data Cloud DLOs, right? So that's something you can turn on, and almost every client wants audit and feedback, especially as you're talking through a LLM. All that is being stored in Data Cloud. And then last but not least is like bring your own model. So they can be either prescriptive models, predictive models using Einstein Studio, or also bring your own LLM models. All that is being powered by Data Cloud. And here is sort of giving you this slide is showing you in terms of what are those agent flows features that get automatically turned on versus one that you as an admin sort of turn on, right? So if I look at Agentforce data libraries or agent analytics, uh, digital wallet using RAG, all that is provisioned by default. Now, things like audit trail, feedback, logging, as well as your unstructured data. Again, that is stuff that is something you as an admin can decide to turn on, and typically like you would. So again, this is a data cloud implementation workshop. Like we won't dive a lot into Agentforce, but I did want to kind of cover how data cloud is really powering Agentforce. All right. So with that, let's kind of talk about use cases, and what is that? So I had shown this slide earlier, right, in terms of what does the data cloud lifecycle look like. But like we say, right, like your customers out there are not explicitly asking for a data cloud, even though that is slowly changing, right? Like unlike established software categories like ERP or CRM or email marketing. Um, your typical customer is not out there saying that I need a data cloud, and even if they do, they may have different interpretations on what they expect from it, right? So this is, here are some keywords that we have seen that why your customers might benefit from a data cloud, right? So when they say things like, I want to increase productivity, or I'm getting bogged down with bad data, or I'm trying to increase efficiency by using AI and automation, or I'm trying to get a single view of our customers, um, or I want more intelligent insight. Like all those are key trigger words on why that customer could benefit from Salesforce Data Cloud. So really, and we say, right, really the value of data cloud is to use any data across any of your data sources to trigger any action across your customer 360 or for Agentforce. So it could be like bring in all my data from CRM, from my data warehouse, from my e-commerce systems to route leads by using product usage data, or create or craft onboarding journeys using their website activity. And same thing for Agentforce as well, right? So really, this mini session here is really about how do you craft your use cases, right? So really, you might be, hey, the customer already has Data Cloud. Now let's go and figure out what use cases they would benefit from. So we say, right, when you're crafting your use cases, there are three key components. It's the why, the how, and the what. So the why is what is the business objective? The how is what are the Salesforce capabilities that will help them sort of get those objectives. And then the what is the exact outcome will we achieve? Like, and what are those KPIs, or how will it impact our business? A key thing I want to point out here is sometimes there's also like you might not have a very straightforward KPI, but there's also like what is the potential impact of not doing anything, right? So being able to also frame that as well. So really here, as I look at it, right, like here are what are the, data cloud capabilities, right? So your business objectives could be like you want to improve your marketing ROI, or you're trying to increase acquisition and retention, or you're trying to improve your efficiency or productivity. And the Salesforce Data Cloud capabilities are the unified customer record, being able to apply, advanced segmentation on all your data, being able to do identity management, being able to do real-time decisioning. And then here on the right-hand side is what we call as the KPI impact or the benefits, like increase in marketing leads, when your campaign effectiveness, or reducing, or increasing your customer satisfaction, or reducing your case handling time. So as you tie all those together is what sort of constitute use case. So when you are crafting your use cases or writing, right, here are just some sort of tips and tricks, and you'll have these slides as takeaways or one, but really state your goals using your customer's language, right? So their objective. So, and really sort of, use words like in, from to explain really where the benefits will come from, and use revenue or cost, either it's cost reduction to kind of show that productivity and efficiency gain, and then, on the right is sort of the quality test, right? Like as you are creating your business objective, like does it clearly state the business benefit? Does it indicate the strategy? And then really, how is this something the Salesforce or you as a partner will influence? And then the Salesforce capabilities are, what are those capabilities? Like, what is it that Data Cloud is giving them that will help them achieve those capabilities, right? So again, there's a lot. Data Cloud can do a lot of things. So I would say, but try to drill down on what are those key important capabilities, and really it should focus on, Salesforce functionality, but more so on the Salesforce Data Cloud functionality. And then as you look at, like, does it make a good uh, quality test? Is like, does this capability, for example, unified profile, does it really support the goals and objective? If you say that I'm trying to get more intelligent insights, does the calculated insight, does it map to a Salesforce feature, right? So that's sort of the mental model, like I want you guys to sort of think through. And then last but not the least is where this is like, how do you define your success metric, right? Or what are those key value drivers? Again, include, like some high level tips are include sort of leading metrics that you can actually track and show progress, right? So you should be able to track where you're at currently, so almost like a baseline, and then to show progress so you can drive. Really, our goal is as you are in those implementations, how do you show the value of Data Cloud, and then so that you can further build upon that implementation. So really the use case framework, we say again, you guys or you all in your partner firm, you may have your own different frameworks for doing this. Again, here's just one suggestion, right? It's like the business goal and capability together combined is what sort of leads to a use case. So here's what sort of a high level use case example, right? In terms of what makes a good use case. So here's a use case that says, we want to find more customers that look like our best customers and decrease cost per acquisition by 5% with lookalikes and advertising activation informed by segment performance using insight and AI, right? So the business goal and the sort of the KPI is the business goal is that you're trying to do more lookalike and you're trying to decrease your cost per acquisition. And the Salesforce Data Cloud capability that helps you achieve that is lookalike and advertising activation. So this was the high level framework in terms of how do you craft your use cases within our implementation toolkit. We have a lot of these templates there that you can leverage in your implementations. But now, like, we want to get your brains thinking as well. So in the next few slides, we are going to show you a few different use cases, and you're in your first implementation, and your customer or your prospect comes to you with this. So what I want you to tell me is based on what you know so far, is this a good fit? So think of it like this is your first Data Cloud implementation, and this is the first use case whereby you can implement, you can show the value of Data Cloud that you can further grow that account. So you'll have three choices. Is it a good fit? If it's not a good fit, and then the last is there's more discovery needed. Now, I know that we all are consultants, so more discovery is always a viable option, but try to stay clear of that. So let's talk through some of the use cases as I will also pull up this poll. All right. So the use case is Beth is the VP of marketing at a large hotel chain. They currently use Service Cloud and Marketing Cloud. She is considering some options to allow her marketing team to get more control over her data that's spread throughout the enterprise. They currently struggle with duplicate records and they need better tools to build segments of guests and then activate that back into different marketing channels, including Marketing Cloud. Now I know that you'll want a lot more, clarification questions, but just based on just give this given statement, is this what you would say is a good fit or, or not a good fit? And then just what? So once we get to those 100 responses, all right. All right. So yes, so based on our, it's like this is something that Data Cloud has done day in and day out since it launched, right? So the fact is, the client in this case, Beth, already has a Salesforce footprint with both Service Cloud and Marketing Cloud. And really, her challenges are that the data is spread throughout the enterprise, and they want to build better segments. So being able to um, uh, unify customer data and activate that to different channels, including Marketing Cloud, is a very core capability of Data Cloud. Now, in the real world, if Beth is saying that she struggles with duplicates, you may have some more questions on what does Beth mean by duplicates, how is she looking to solve for that, and this is where you come in as consultant to kind of talk about the Data Cloud capabilities of the unified profile, like, and how it works. Uh, all right, let's look at next one. Hold on if I can pull up. All right. Anil is the VP of IT at a large banking or a financial services firm. They have several different sales cloud orgs connected to a single marketing cloud org. They want to use Data Cloud as an end-to-end content management system for each of their connected orgs and create this unified privacy center across multiple brands and channels for the different products that they sell. So just based on what you've heard, in your view, will this be a good fit? Will this be, something, or you don't, or it gives you heartburn, like it's not a good fit? And if so, and just think about, we want what those items are, right? So, all right. All right, just the way it's just outlined in our, like, this gives us heartburn, and it's not a good fit for phase one. Like, why is that, right? So first of all, the term end-to-end consent management and creating this unified privacy center. So now Data Cloud can absolutely ingest consent data from any of your system of records, and it can be used as a reference for segmentation, but it's not really positioned to be a comprehensive end-to-end consent management system. Like, and why is that, right? So typically when customers say consent management, they are expecting that consent signals to get propagated back to all of your different source systems as well, right? So typically that's when we find they have a best of breed tool like a OneTrust or a Trust Arc. So really, Data Cloud as it's outlined, and I think this is where, just for is this something that you would do in an initial phase one type implementation, and that's why in our view, this is sort of not a good fit, and really like you would try to uncover what is it that the customer is looking for as well. All right. Mhm. Hold on, I'm trying to share the next poll if I can. Hold on. Oh, All right. So in this case, hopefully you guys can see the poll. Okay, yes, I do. In this case, Kim, she's the CIO for a large food supply company. They just have bought Data Cloud to unify their customer accounts across their 19 different Salesforce orgs. She just met with a chief revenue officer who said that they want to gain more insights into all the different open opportunities and existing contracts in order to find more ways to cross-sell, upsell, and partner across orgs to really create this unified sales strategy and expose the data which in each of their org, each of that connected org for the sales team as well. Well, now, in this initial just a gut check is yes, it is a good fit, right? The fact is they are looking to unify customer accounts, which is something that Data Cloud can do. They're trying to get more insights now. And then also exposing data, right? Now with the use of Lightning Web components and now with Data Cloud One as well, with the use of like CRM enrichments and account Data Cloud should be able to assemble those insights like for this use case. Now, obviously, as you're in implementations, you won't do all 19 orgs on day one, but really find out what are those main, call it high impact orgs. If it's three orgs, five orgs, I don't know what that number is, but this is where you would work with Kim or the client in this case to really see that which are going to be that high impact orgs, which will help them really drive impact, right? The fact is, even if you have to build custom Lightning Web components, the fact is it uses the same framework. You can build it once and easily deploy it across orgs. And this is actually a real uh, customer use case for Salesforce, where, and I think, and it is like a food manufacturing, where, and in the end, they did end up adopting Data Cloud. All right. Now let us look at one more use case. All right. So this is, trying to establish a golden record. So Mario is for a large retailer. The CIO, they currently kind of struggle with maintaining consistency of key data, and they are looking for a platform that can manage data from systems containing orders, products, inventory, service, sales, and marketing, and create really golden records for customers, for products, for suppliers, and then propagate that back across the enterprise. All right. I am going to, okay. All right. So just the way this is outlined, again, the fact is like we really need to do more discovery here, but it's really not a good fit for MVP as it's stated, right? So, really one thing is, I think this is where I would say if in my 4 years of working on data cloud, there's one question that's come up. It's like golden record versus unified profile. What's the differences? What is the overlap? So really what we say, what data cloud creates is a unified profile. So when your customer is saying a golden record, really, this is where you come in as our trusted partners in terms of being able to explain, first of all, trying to understand from the customer on what they mean when they say a golden record, but then also being able to explain what is it that Data Cloud does in terms of a unified profile and really how does it work. The reason we said it's not a good fit just as it's outlined is typically what we have seen is when customers use the term golden record and others, they are typically looking for an MDM type system, right? Which is not what Data Cloud is. So we say that Data Cloud is a system of reference and not a system of record, so really keep that in mind, right? And then as we kind of go a bit more later on, like there's a session on, or we have a little mini section on really what is the overlap between data cloud and MDM and what that common patterns are. All right, next up is we have on Salesforce Discovery. All right, Matt, you want to take this?
Absolutely. Let me replace your current share. Get my screen shared on my end. All good? Can you see my discovery slide, Arvin? You're on mute.
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, well, let's get going then. So, about discovery, right? That's that stage in the process, where your customer are going to be well aligned in terms of, the implementation's overall outcomes. You've aligned on their vision, their values, the goals, and then you've completed a basic readiness assessment in terms of their people, their process, the data, technology. And also, Arvin, as you just covered, we've now got a better sense in terms of the use cases, in terms of like the outcomes that they're driving, what success looks like there, how it's measured, and then those key systems and actions that need to take place in order to facilitate those use cases. So from here, discovery, we start to change gears away from those business processes, the vision strategy, the more technical folks. Those people enter in and get a sense of how to make these use cases actually come to life in terms of an overall architectural plan that includes configuration, thorough review of organizational data. This is the technical discovery phase. There's a lot of really critical information that needs to be gathered in this phase in order to make sure that your implementation is successful. So technical discovery is typically one of the largest and most critical parts of your implementation. There's a lot of goals to achieve here. This is where you start to need to understand that data landscape, that your customers operate in and need to integrate. You'll refine your use cases and objectives. You'll gather technical requirements on how to build your use cases, and then their feasibility in terms of the quality of data that's present. You'll get a better understanding of their governance and then compliance requirements and how to align and manage and promote changes in those various environments. Once you've gathered all of that important information, you'll be revisiting expectations in terms of consumption, scaling, performance, and you can offer a more accurate perspective on what to expect there. So while you're in this stage, it's really important to proceed with care. Every customer's data, their needs are very unique, they're very complex. And if you spend your time wisely here and understand that complexity and plan for it, it should make a big difference later on. You're going to be wasting fewer cycles, reworking parts of the platform because you'll have a full understanding of how things should be fitting together. You'll keep things simpler here by making unnecessary, not making, but eliminating complexities, which makes things easier to build, easier to train, and you'll make sure that there's no surprises in terms of compliance or data quality. It's also really important here to consider that not everyone is completely aware of how complex their enterprise data is and how complex their integrations are. Things are often a lot more messy than they may seem, and that includes how teams even communicate and align with each other internally. Your use cases, even though we have a general sense of them, they may still be fairly loosely defined at this point. So in this stage, you really need to get tactical in terms of how many of them there are, how they come together, and then be meticulous in terms of details. How do you keep track of those in your blueprint? The other thing is that you're going to have a lot of options on how to achieve these use cases. And they're not all equal in terms of cost and the impact of consumption. Make sure that you ask the right questions in this stage to really understand precisely what your customers' needs are, so you don't end up over architecting a solution which can increase costs and dilute their value. I'm sure many, if not most of you, have pretty thorough processes for how you go about discovery, and I'm glad for that. How deeply you go into discovery, though, depends a lot on how much you already know. That could be about your customer, about their existing data, the complexity of the plan that's present. Despite the length of that discovery process, though, you're going to need to cover certain themes. When you're kicking off, you need to take time to introduce those new team members, make sure everybody's aligned on goals, objectives, scope, timeline, those sorts of things. Then in that next phase, you're going to want to dive more deeply into those use cases. So when you do a use case deep dive, you'll want to understand at a more discrete level those methods of action that are needed to accomplish your use case, the systems required that are providing the data or maybe receiving it, the users involved in the process, that could be your administrators, end users, the stakeholders involved, their level of involvement, and the metrics or KPIs being generated to determine the success or the failure of that effort. So start by making sure that you're tracking how Data Cloud is taking action on data. So if Data Cloud's helping Marketing Cloud, what specific actions is it taking? Is it a data action? Is it doing segmentation? Is it doing activation, or is it doing something else? And on what channels? Is this email? Is it SMS? Is this mobile? Then look at your sources, look at your endpoints. What's providing inputs like customer data, engagement, or product information? What systems might need to further process that data in between, like data that's coming from or going to Amazon SageMaker? And then what's receiving outputs like enrichment, activation, analytics? From a stakeholder perspective, make sure you understand all the people and roles that are using the data. Is it service users? Is it salespeople, marketers, data scientists? Get all those groups identified. And in addition to your end users, who are your data experts? Once you dive deep into those different sources and their data, you're definitely going to need to have experts at hand. They can really help with some of those various steps, including guiding through that ingestion process harmonization, especially harmonization as you start to translate that data across different operational units, and how the data relates within and across those different systems. And then in terms of governance, who's in charge there? Who knows what policies each source has to adhere to? And then can provide that level of clarity on access control, processing, visibility of data once you bring it into Data Cloud. Those could be varied, but depending on the different use cases. Lastly, it's important to know what success looks like for each use case and how those outcomes are going to be analyzed. For example, if you're trying to influence case deflection, or if you're trying to increase conversion, how are those currently being measured? And how do you know that your efforts are going to make an impact here versus a control group? And where will the outcomes be analyzed? And are there newer and better ways to measure now that Data Cloud is present? So once you've gathered all those key details, for your use cases, it's time to conduct your source system and data discovery, where you'll identify the systems that provide data, how the data is organized, what you'll be connecting or ingesting, how you'll access that, and then the quality of that data. So using the 5 V's of data can be a pretty good practice here for your source and system discovery. And they stand for volume, value, veracity, velocity, and variety. So when you're considering volume, you probably want to bring in the right amount of data to support your use cases, and typically not more than that. Data Cloud, it's not a backup system, it's operational data. It's also a consumption-based pricing model. So whoever said it's always better to have it and not need it, and then need it instead of need it and not have it, I say that a lot as a dad. I would never say that, however, in a system that made me pay for storage and use. Beyond generally limiting volume, there's a few other questions here to help identify what's important. What do we need to satisfy our use cases in terms of data? What's not needed that you might currently be ingesting or planning to ingest that's part of a bundle? And if you're loading historical data, well, how much of that do you need? How far back do you need to go? If you have to reduce a high volume source, well, what are your options? Can you pre-process data? Well, sometimes, but within Data Cloud, you can probably set a filter on your data lake object. You could use transforms to filter as well. There's a lot of different options present to help reduce that high volume source. And also works well for systems like CRM, where you don't necessarily have the ability to limit before it's ingested. Lastly, keep in mind that sources typically grow in volume over time. So make sure that you think of ways to keep that data operable and performant. When it comes to sources, You've got to focus on, the objects and fields and the sources that are valuable. The reverse of that is this. Avoid connecting sources or ingesting data or fields or columns that do not support your objectives. Just, make sure that you're justifying at every step how those sources contribute to those objectives. More specifically, think about how they aid in your decision making, how they better drive personalization or drive customer experience. If you're on the fence and you're thinking about the cost to benefit ratio of that source, think about it as the way we kind of say it in the US. Is that juice worth the squeeze? And that you could think about that at the field level or the object level or the source system level. And think about it in terms of phases as well. Is this system really ideal for our first phase, or should we bring that in a later phase? Thinking about how often the data might be used is also a good way to focus your thought there, as well as how many people might actually benefit from it. Lastly, there are some sources that may not be valuable at the start. They take time to grow. But the reverse of that is also true. Some sources lose value over time. Veracity basically means accuracy. We want to focus on sources that are factual, that are accurate, and that are trusted. There's another section I'll spend where we talk a little bit more about data quality, but for discovery, think of these things. Even if the data is trusted, is it operable? Do you need to standardize this data, normalize it, or cleanse some of it first? Does the quality of the data change over time? Does it drift? Does it get worse over time? As standards, were more lax in the past. What does a perfect record look like in your org? How many fit that model? And then how well populated is that data? As far as velocity, that's really all about speed, right? Everybody wants data, they want it fast. We have a lot of options on how fast we can retrieve and use data, but typically those come at a larger, higher operating cost. So as you're starting to analyze sources, think about how quickly you actually need to make use of that data. Sometimes the data doesn't take a straight path to data cloud. There might be steps along the way where it might slow things down. And data lakes are a good example of that. They're a convenient and robust, stopping point for a lot of data where it starts to get gathered together, but it's not always fast as being able to get direct data directly from a source system. If you're thinking about getting data in batches, think about, well, how often do those batches need to be run? How often does that schedule support my use cases? And then how often do you need a full refresh versus just change data, deltas? And then variety. Last but not least, it's pretty unlikely you'll be the first company in the world that's trying to organize data within your customer's business. It is a constant process of transformation. It's very likely you're going to have more than one source to consider when ingesting data, and there's trade-offs there between these sources. You might have something very complete, like a lakehouse, like Snowflake, but maybe that's going to rely on a lot of different automated batch processing that causes delays, and the speed at which that data lands in the platform starts to suffer. So keep that in mind when you're connecting. Okay, let's go to a poll here. Let me find my harmonization or my discovery poll. So I got a question to kind of take a quick pause in this section. So let's talk about a company that is delivering a large file every day, and their entire customer database is there from their ERP, and it's getting dropped in an S3 bucket. And in Data Cloud, there's a full refresh process that's ingesting it every single day. But the very few records are actually changing there on a daily basis. So now you're a consultant. What do you recommend to improve this process? Should you say, well, no, it's good. Full refresh is best approach. Or should you ask the customer to provide only change records in their file and then switch that process to upsert? Or would you ask the customer to split the file into upserts and deletions and process each of those separately? I'll give you a few seconds to answer. Let's try to get to 50% participation here. And there's no wrong answers. So just give your best answer and I'll explain the rest. All right, we're at 50%. And for those of you that are like, why is Matt not talking? It's because there's a poll present. Look for the poll tool, and in the next one, we'll make sure that you get a chance to answer. Um, all right, so let me explain. Let me end this. I'll show the results here and then talk it through. So before I go to the big reveal, most of you kind of said B. Ask the customer to provide only change records in their file and switch the process to upsert. Now, I chose a different answer and I'll explain why. Like I said, there's no wrong answers. All of this is somewhat situational. Um, but I think the most correct answer here is C. You want to ask that customer to split the file into upserts and deletions and process each one of those separately. And here's why. If we're looking at controlling volume in terms of data that's being ingested into Data Cloud, and we're replacing the entire ERP database every single day, it is possible that we're processing a lot of data that doesn't have a lot of value. So we could do B, but if we just did an upsert process on the changed records, are we removing deletions? And the answer is we're not. So we would have to account for those separately, upserts and deletions, and make sure that that gets ingested instead of option B. So again, B would be fine if we didn't worry about deletions, and A would be fine if we didn't worry about cost and operational value and scale. A is certainly the simplest way to go, but C is probably the most efficient and correct. Okay, let's talk about governance, security, and compliance. This is that step in technical discovery where we want to make sure that we're fully aware of policies that are governing data and we're assuring kind of legal and operational readiness for the ways that we consume, use, and activate our data. So here's some key considerations, a bunch of questions on here that every consultant should raise when evaluating those governance, security, compliance readiness. In terms of access control, who's authorized to view and use this data, and then at what level of detail or what scope? And the next two questions here go hand in hand. For things like sensitive information, what kinds of sensitive data is going to be kept and what policies are the customer subject to? And then how do we classify that protected information in the platform? There's tools to do that, and Arvin's going to go through that next. Later today. These could be things like personal identifiers, health records, payment information. For things like data portability and processing restrictions, what restrictions exist on what systems and on how data can be processed or transferred. This has got to get brought up pretty early in discovery, as there could be some assumptions that data cloud can allow for data residency in more than one region. It can't. So when you provision data cloud gets provisioned in a specific region. And if you need to actually physically have that data take residence in multiple locations, the only option with data cloud is to have multiple different data cloud orgs to do it. Data spaces will not simply cover that on its own. For things like sharing with third parties, discuss generally and then focus on each use case and then find situations where it's permitted for data sharing, including things like vendor access in the case of advertisers or partner access for things like third parties. Data Cloud's data spaces, they can help set up partitions or zones of control for data within the platform. So if you're thinking about different brands, that's fine. If you're considering data spaces, look at specific requirements around security zones, business units, regional restrictions, that sort of thing. For data subject rights or DSR, how should the rights of your individuals or profiles be expressed? How should they be enforced? Understand that how the customer might express their right to request data access, the right to be forgotten or deleting data, portability. Especially under regulations like GDPR, how do you plan to accommodate those requests in the platform? We have methods. Just think about how that process is going to work. This next one, it might be a better question for earlier on, but you want to get the sense of their current governance maturity. That's for things like data stewardship, lineage tracking, metadata management, policy enforcement. A lot of those are going to need to get figured out early. For encryption, does your customer have and specific standards or requirements for encryption? Data is already encrypted. It's encrypted in transit. It's encrypted at rest. But if the customer requires that they use their own encryption keys, well, there's ways to achieve that. Just make sure that you're thinking about that ahead of time. It's just a few of those questions to get you going through this process. But raising these questions early and upfront, it's going to ensure that security and compliance, they're not just check boxes at the end, they're really embedded in the architecture from the start. This protects the customer, their users, and the integrity of the data that we help them manage. Next up is creating a harmonization and unification strategy. It's in this phase of the discovery we're going to align on common data mappings and relationships, propose transformations, and then identify attributes used in the unification process, as well as the rules that power it. It's important to remember that harmonization, it's a critical function for Data Cloud because it allows the data from different sources to be understood in a common way, common schema. If you skip harmonization, that is, if you can't get your customer to understand how that data fits together, it's not going to fit together. And although you might still have records like customers or accounts, you're not going to have any shared insights across those sources because none of the data can be analyzed in a common way. No harmonization, no insights. It's just as simple as that. So we want to look at good examples of data here to understand what kind of standards we're building towards. So try to find out what a good or a complete record might look like in a given system or in the org overall. And then compare that against what you actually have for your data. Digging deeper, what are those fields that define it? What do you make required, and what do those fields tell you about the record? When looking across different systems, are those fields that look common? Are they actually telling the same story? Did they actually mean the same thing? And then how well can we trust the accuracy of those different fields across sources? And how well populated are they? And when we're looking at different schemas and different systems, how do we shape it so all of those pieces start to fit together? Can we normalize this to kind of extract the important parts? How do we flatten this data to make it more similar? I'm just covering this briefly because we'll dig more deeply into data quality in a little bit here. So next on our discovery journey, is this stage where we start to gather information to build those insights and those actions. These are the key metrics that we aggregate across sources. We collect, more discrete requirements for those methods of action we're about to take in Data Cloud. So we're kind of nearing the end of the line in terms of discovery. We're getting to the fun part. This is where things start to take action. We want to find patterns in data here and help your team make smart decisions. So to aid with that, here's a few questions to kind of find ways to make data actionable. So what else is happening with your customers? Besides the data that we already have, what's going on with your customers that could help sales or service? For example, are they opening support cases? Are they buying new products? Are they visiting your website when they're looking for knowledge? That's important insight. What are the important moments for your customers or accounts? What are the key events or milestones that matter? This could be things like contract renewals, reaching a spending limit, or hitting a service usage cap. And how would you respond to changes in some of those key metrics? If something important, some metric that's going up or going down, what should happen as a result? So, for example, if customer satisfaction drops, what's the action that we take? Should someone call them? Or if a customer buys more, should sales follow up? Lots of options to consider. How often should we check for those changes? Do we want to check daily, weekly, monthly in terms of those patterns of data? Some things might need fast action, while others we need to measure over time. And then who needs to take action when something happens? Who's responsible for doing something about it? Is that the sales team, service team, maybe a manager? And then once we know who's taking action, what's that process flow look like in terms of taking it? What are the steps that the team should follow? How do we enable that in terms of the platform, in terms of configuration? For example, do we send an email? Do we make a call? Do we open a case? Do we review predictions and then make decisions based off of that? And then what is the decision? And lastly, who else needs to know? Besides the person that's immediately taking action, who else needs to be informed? Maybe it's a manager or another team associate that needs to get updates. The goal here is to not just see what's happening, but to do something about it. By answering these questions, we make sure that those insights turn into real actions that help your customers and your business. And then last but not least, the last step of discovery is to kind of wrap things up with your configuration blueprint. Your blueprint is that ultimate deliverable from this process that goes over everything that you heard from the customer and how you're planning on addressing their business needs with those fully refined use cases, a technical architecture that facilitates the process, and then instructions for your configuration team to bring that plan to reality. It's also a good idea to, at this stage, to double check on expectations with consumption, make sure you're on track there. And then after this stage of discovery, if you've been collecting the right information, you should probably have the most accurate picture possible of that consumption. And we'll talk about some ways to analyze and process that and estimate later in the day. But let me go back and um, ask another poll here for you to kind of wrap things up here on discovery. So, let's say you're in a discovery session focused on compliance, and your client tells you that they purchased extra data spaces in order to set up strict partitions of customer data between different geographies. So now you as a consultant, what's the most important clarification question you should ask? Should you ask, well, can you tell me about the data residency requirements of those different geos? Could you ask, well, how many geographic regions do you operate in and how many data spaces do you have? Or do you ask, what fields in your collected data indicate its region of origin or control? Now, all of these are good questions, no doubt. But what is the most important question that's going to impact your configuration and compliance? All right, let's end this. Let's take a look at the results. Most of you said, can you tell me about the data residency requirements for those different geos? Let's take a look at the recommended answer here. Now, I agree. That is probably the most important clarification question to ask because, Data Cloud operates in a single region. If that customer actually requires that data to be, residing in different geographies, you need to back this up and go back to your, account executive and say, we need to have a different plan for data residency because Data Cloud operates in only one geo at a time. Data spaces will not cover it. All right. Let's go through a few resources on how to accelerate your discovery process. So the first is our implementation toolkit. If you go to this page, the short link sfdc.co/dcimp toolkit, and it's case sensitive. It's going to contain a lot of different accelerators out there for you to get started. There's a deck on kind of guiding your customer through use cases, general guidance for implementations, questions that you can ask during discovery, a data workbook, that blueprint template, project plan, lots more. So check out that resource. All right, let's jump into data quality. I talked a little bit about that in the last time in Discovery, but it deserves its own section. They are kind of two parts of the same whole. Data quality in general, it's extremely important to everything, not just Data Cloud. Because data it's the fuel. It's the thing that propels companies to create better products, better experiences, better outcomes for customers. And as you can imagine, a system with bad fuel, well, that can backfire sometimes. Every customer, they've got challenges with data. That's why you're there. And if you don't stop and understand that quality of your data before you connect it to Data Cloud, you kind of put the whole project at risk. It's a shared responsibility to survey your customers' data quality to ensure that they're going to reach their goals. So what if we don't, right? What's at risk there? Well, when data is obsolete, you could get misguided decisions. Reports and dashboards that are built on outdated numbers, well, they can drive the wrong strategies. You waste marketing budget targeting dead emails or inactive accounts. And worst of all, you're going to erode customer trust when you reach out with outdated or incorrect personalization. When data is inconsistent, well, then that means that systems don't agree on what's true. Sales might see a customer as active while support sees them as dormant, or maybe billing misfires due to the wrong product details. This breaks reporting, forecasting, automation, and personalization. It even increases compliance risk if you don't know which profile is correct or where the data came from. GDPR and CCPA violations, it could become real threats. And when data is invalid or it's missing, everything falls apart. KPIs get calculated from bad inputs, AI models are trained on flawed patterns, and then identity resolution is going to fail because of malformed emails or faulty phone numbers. Journeys are going to break, automations misfire, campaigns miss their audience. What does that sound like? Well, that sounds like compliance risk to me. Every one of these issues can lead to a failure to comply. So as you're analyzing your customers' data, trying to come up with ways to reduce your risk of implementation success, there's a few focal points that I want to introduce to help with that process. And you could call it the 6 C's of data quality. There's a lot of variations on this. These are mine, and that means basically consistency, completeness, currents. Your data is correct, current, contextual, and compliant. Let's kind of dig into each of these here. So consistency, we want to it's all about making sure that your data speaks the same language across different systems, different teams, different processes. And in Data Cloud, that's critical for delivering reliable insights and actions. So when data lacks consistency, whether that's different formats for dates or varying status labels, or maybe we've got mismatched field structures across different sources, that's going to create friction that breaks down everything from segmentation to reporting. So in Data Cloud, lots of processes depend on consistent data to function properly. Consistency, it's going to ensure that when we unify, we segment, analyze, we're acting on data. We're comparing apples to apples here, not apples to oranges. This is critical in a lot of places. In calculated insights and batch transforms, these processes, they don't handle fuzzy logic, or guesswork really well. And precision matters here. For segmentation, these are non-standard fields, like different ways to record regions or different product names. It can make it hard for marketers to sort of gather up all the identifiers to target the right audience. And then during harmonization, we need to choose which fields best represent the record across systems. If fields are consistent, this step gets messy fast. Some areas are a little bit more forgiving than others. For example, identity resolution, it uses normalization to account for some variance in things like mailing addresses, phone numbers, and then fuzzy matching for variability in things like spelling someone's name, for example, is helpful, but it's not a magic wand. It's if data is wildly inconsistent with things like missing fields or status values that mean different things across different systems, it's going to increase the chances of false matches or missed connections. Consistency is making sure that those key identifiers like emails, names, addresses, and phone numbers are aligned and they're structured similarly. It's going to make it easier for fuzzy matching to do its job well. And with unstructured data, consistency plays a smaller role here just because, vector indexes are extracting the semantic meaning of text, not its formatting. And again, it's a smaller role. It's not a magic wand. Retrievers are going to help by giving the ability to pre-filter your unstructured data, and that relies on greater precision and consistency matters there. If your unstructured data uses inconsistent values in its metadata, well, you may not be able to filter the way that you want. So what are some common things to check for when you're inspecting data? Well, when checking for consistency, focus on areas like timestamps. Are time zones included as part of it? And if not, what time zone is inferred here? Data Cloud doesn't store values in pick lists, but your source systems do. So when you ingest, look at those fields, and the fields that track statuses. Do the values mean the same thing across those systems? Do they match up? Lastly, remember that consistency tends to drop the older that data gets. The more sources you connect and the more regions you bring together. So let's move on to completeness, which is all about, whether we have the right data in the right places to support the use cases that we care about. It's not just about having some data, it's about having the necessary data available. It's usable and it's ready to support things like segmentation, personalization, reporting, AI modeling. Think of completeness as the difference between seeing part of the picture and seeing the whole picture clearly. We break completeness down into a few key areas. First, There's field completeness, you know. So are the individual fields like emails, phone numbers, statuses, are they filled in reliably across all of our sources? Missing data here in those places can lead to false impressions, like thinking an audience is actually larger than it really is because key fields are empty. You know, and while some incompleteness is okay, tools like unified profiles, it'll help stitch together partial records. Too much missing data can limit what you can do. Then there's record completeness. Do we have all the records we expect here? For example, are all the profiles or all the event logs present that we are expecting? Are there gaps from system outages? Are there missing logs? You know, these gaps can also lead to inaccurate insights. You know, and finally, profile completeness. You know, are our records connected across systems? Do we have the supporting keys and relationships in our data to link things together? For example, is anonymous data tied back to known profiles? Can we link a device ID in that case to a known profile with an exact match on a device ID? A good tip here is to come up with a way to grade your records by completeness. This can help you prioritize which data is ready for use and where to focus cleanup efforts. The next step is correctness. You know, we want to make sure that the data that we have accurately and faithfully reflects the customer or account. You know, some of this is not up to the data itself, but it's up to your stakeholders. How much trust do they have in a particular source or an object or time period within their history? Does trust tend to run low when a certain team was managing governance? You know, just because there's data there, it doesn't mean that it's going to be useful. Take a look at the contact points in this example. You know, would you unify a profile that contained these contact points? Take a look at them right now on the screen. Would you unify these phone numbers? Would you unify these email addresses? And if you did, let's say you did unify them. How many profiles are going to consolidate around email at domain.com or nope at nope.com? Probably more than you might think. You know, these invalid contact points, throw those out. Because if you keep them and use them, it's going to lead to poor insights, faulty consolidation, and probably angry customers. So you can avoid issues like this by having a process to analyze and then filter your data. You know, for the analysis side, there's applications that help with profiling that are available in the App Exchange. And if you want to use some simple queries in the query editor, you can look instead at, you know, different expressions, is null, regular expressions. They can help catch common traps there. Then when it comes to filtering your data, transforms can really help too. The last thing I'll say here is that any efforts that you make, any in Data Cloud to help filter or pre-process or standardize your data ahead of time, that's going to be a valuable effort. But again, it's only one link in a longer chain. If you can't find ways to fix data quality problems in the source systems themselves, Data Cloud's going to drift away from being an accurate representation of the data that it manages. You know, quality remedies in both places are definitely better executed together. Next two pillars I'll tackle together, that's currency, contextuality. Current data, it's critical for making sure that we're able to make timely decisions. But not all old data is bad data. It's important to understand that data decay and you know and mark that stale data appropriately rather than just throwing it out. You know, identifying dormant profiles, that's especially useful for modeling and trend analysis, giving you insight into behavior over time. Tools like Calculated Insights, they can help by aggregating recency metrics, showing when a customer last interacted, updated their profile, or made a purchase, making it easier to filter or flag stale records when you need to. And when your data is contextual, it's making sure that the data you have is actually useful for your specific use cases. It's not enough to collect data, it needs to be well suited for the job it's going to be given. For example, if your use case involves email campaigns, you'll want to filter records that have a valid contact point. If you're focused on loyalty programs or customer lifetime value, you need the right aggregations, things like recency, frequency, monetary value scores, or those loyalty tiers, like gold, silver, bronze, to drive meaningful actions here. Mapping fields with intention is a really important part of it. Harmonized data is not just about matching names, it's ensuring that the right fields are available and usable for your goals. The more contextually accurate your data is, the more precisely you can act on it, whether it's through things like segmentation, personalization, predictions. Together, when your data is current and contextual and things are timely, relevant, and they're ready for action. Final piece of those 6 C's is compliant, making sure that the data in Data Cloud follows the rules and policies that govern how it can be used. This is a big section, and frankly, we could probably do separate sessions on each of these things, but a major part of compliance is consent. Do we need consent to use this data? Do we have consent to use this data? It's not just a checkbox. It comes with levels and scopes that need to be respected. For example, a customer might give consent for marketing emails, but not for sharing their data off platform with third parties. Now, how do we know that? How are we tracking that? And how are we honoring that? Recency really matters here too. When was the last consent given or updated? Timestamps are your best friend for tracking this, and they help us respond to changes in a customer's status or preferences. And when it comes to the right to be forgotten, it's not as simple as just deleting data. It requires understanding where the data lives, how it's connected, and how to fully remove it across all of your systems. Another piece of compliance is access control, what users can see, use, or share that data. Remember, there's governance tools in Data Cloud like tagging and classifying data, setting policies, and creating data spaces, assigning permission sets. But it's not just about internal access here. What about obsolete records? How long do we want to hold on to data as a liability? If it's not operable, if we don't need it, why are we holding on to it within Data Cloud? Get rid of it. Setting up batch transforms or retention policies really helps ensure that outdated data doesn't sit around longer than it should. Finally, traceability. That's another key lens to analyze the sourcing and tracing of where records come from. Data lineage, knowing where that data comes from, how it's changed, where it's going. It's really crucial for audits and building trust in your systems. But remember, an attribution source is not the same as a data source. It's easy to say, well, this record, yeah, it came from CRM. But what happens if that data was migrated 3 times along the way? Where did that data actually come from? That's why valid timestamps and clear consent records, what system collected consent for what scope, and so on, they're really important. Always keep in mind, lastly, Data Cloud here, it's a system of reference. It's not a system of record. It brings data together, but it's not a full consent management system. You still need to integrate with your source systems to ensure that consent and governance are handled properly end to end. All right, let's take a quick poll here. Let me go to data quality, launch this next poll. So let's say you're analyzing your customer's data set and you detect a large number of records with null as an email value for contacts. In addition to notifying the client, how should you plan to address this discovery as a consultant, knowing that they plan to use the data for things like marketing, analytical, and sales use cases? Should you use formula fields to empty the email address value when a text of null is encountered? Should you add a DLO filter to restrict processing of all contacts with an email of null? Should you filter the bad contact points during a batch transformation process? Or should you ask the client to fix their data quality problem before ingesting the data? Now, all of these are viable options, and your goal as a consultant now is to figure out what's the best option given the choices here. All right, we're at about 50%. Let me talk these through. And again, um, it's better that you take us a guess at this and then we'll talk through all of these. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at the results. Number one answer here coming in at 40 votes is that they asked the client to fix the data quality problem before ingesting the data. I love that option. Sadly, that's not always going to be available to us. I would love to be able to tell every client to fix their data before we ingest it. It's not always practical. So we have the tool, we have Data Cloud, we have options to be able to fix some things. So what's our best choice there beyond that option D? In my case, I prefer C. Filter those bad contact points during a batch transformation process. This is going to ensure that, bad data it's not going to be used, first of all. And it will still work in those, one-to-many contact point scenarios. Let's say I'm ingesting CRM data and I have a business email address and a personal email address, and multiple different contact points on a single contact record. I'm going to need to batch transform anyway, or streaming transform, whatever. But during that or batch transformation process, I can set up filter mechanisms to toss out that junk. And that's a good step to be using because most implementations will probably do some type of transformation. Formula fields, you know, you could kind of empty the email address, but it's not going to reflect the true state of the data in the source. And it's also, it may create additional problems, considering you're not doing a transformation step there. And then adding a deal load of a filter to restrict processing on all contacts of an email of null. It's going to filter out the contacts from processing for other use cases such as analytics. We won't be able to actually see it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the unified profile, and then I think it's time for a quick break. So, you know, we talked a little bit about the unified profile in general as Data Cloud as a value driver. One thing I want everybody to understand going out of this is that the unified profile that Data Cloud creates is mutable. It's going to change, and I want you to understand why it changes, how it changes, and how that's different from other types of systems out there that generate something like a golden record when we talk about master data management. So to start, let's take a look at these two different records that we have here. We have one that says Astro Salesforce and one that says R2 Salesforce. Both are coming in through CRM, okay? And let's imagine we've implemented Data Cloud, we're running identity resolution on these two different records, and we've got some match rules set up. We've got one that's, matching based off of fuzzy first name, exact last name, and email address, and another that is matching on fuzzy first name, exact last name, and phone number, okay? So we run identity resolution on these two records and we get two different UUIDs here. So you can see in that first record, we've got one ending in 011 and then another ending in 022. So these names are not similar enough, R2 and Astro, for Data Cloud to be matching them together, okay? So they see them as separate records. We get two different UUIDs here. But let's say, for example, that, we send an email campaign out to these records and we send one to Astro Salesforce and one to R2 Salesforce, and R2 sees that email personalized as R2 and says, well, that's not my name. He calls up the service agent and says, hey, my name's not Astro or R2 Salesforce, it's Astro Salesforce. And then that service rep says, oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Salesforce, let me update your records. And now that record changes to say Astro Salesforce instead of R2 Salesforce. And now let's imagine identity resolution runs again. Well, when it looks at the change record, it says, aha, I have another record that I can match it with. It looks like this other record ending in 011, Astro Salesforce, looks similar. So we match them together. What did we do? Previously, we had two different UUIDs. We had 011 and 022. When that record improved, when it changed, we eliminated the need for that extra UUID. It disappeared because the record became linked to the other one, 011. So when that happens, we have a change in that universally that UUID, that profile ID from identity resolution. And so I'm just using this as one example of how these different types of records can change their UUIDs. It is absolutely, it happens all the time. and it's normal and it's okay. So what does that mean? That means, and most importantly, if you have options for what you create as a subscriber key in Marketing Cloud, do not consider UUID as a subscriber key. It's mutable. It changes. Your consent in Marketing Cloud is tied to that. So you definitely don't want to be using a UUID as a candidate for your subscriber key. So then what do we get with it? What's its true value? Why do I need a UUID? Not a lot of I value inherently. It's basically that product that we get from running identity resolution. It allows you to find other connected profiles. But what I want you all to understand here is that, the real unsung hero of identity resolution, it's not the unified profile ID, the UUID. It's the unified link. When you want to make use of the data from Data Cloud from external sources, and you need to know that the ID is mutable, remember that unified link exists. It's there to give you a linkage from your source system. That's your identifier, for your individual or account or anything else that you were linking together. And it tells you the current UUID that's assigned to that identifier. So think of it this way. If I need to be able to retrieve all the unified profiles from multiple different systems, I start with my first identifier from my key system. So let's say I'll take my 18-digit contact ID from Salesforce. With it, I'll be able to gather all this information from that Salesforce org. I go find the unified link associated with that profile. That gives me the unified individual connected to that link. And now I can go back and find all the other unified links associated with that unified individual. So through that traversal and joining process, I can take any primary key from any contributing system, like in this case, Salesforce, and find everything else through that linkage, through the unified link to the unified individual. So let's take a few minutes to kind of contrast that with other concepts people might be more familiar with, like master data management. There's a lot of different types of MDM. It's been around for a while. And Data Cloud gets compared a lot with those systems, but a lot, if not most of them, follow certain constants, and many of them produce different types of identifiers. Largely known as a golden record. So you might hear comparisons with the unified profile to a golden record. At a high level, a golden record's goal is to focus on survivorship, picking the best record or value amongst a list of possible duplicates. The product is a master record for a particular entity. It could be an individual, could be a contact or a product, but it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and continuous alignment within the business to make sure that these rules are running correctly. Then the system typically propagates those attributes by overriding existing values in source systems, sometimes leading to a loss of lineage, loss of traceability. Let me show you what I mean. So in this example now, let's look at these three different records that are coming from a source system, service system in this case. We've got Jim Wentz, James Wentz, and Jimmy Wentz. Each one has a different primary email address. So Jim's is jwentztravel at Hotmail, James Wentz is jwentz at Hotmail, and then this third one, Jimmy, is jwentz at AOL. Now, in a system of propagation and mastery and MDM system, and there's lots of other representations of these attributes as well. His first name varies in each one of those. Multiple different contributing attributes here. Well, in MDM, when we're generating a golden record and we want to try to pick the best attribute that represents that profile, we go from those three different iterances of that first name or primary email address and mobile phone down to one. And that process data is lost, and it sometimes gets overwritten as we propagate those attributes back out to those contributing systems. Is that the right idea in every situation? Probably not. So let me walk through this next section and kind of explain our model a little bit better on how our unified profile works as a contrast to that concept. So, in our system, the purpose of making a unified profile, well, that's to link together all of our records into a single view of our customer, or single view of our account. And then reconciliation, that gets used to help provide just a summary for that profile, almost like labels like how do we represent this unified profile best, rather than picking attributes to propagate. And then we sort of sidestep the whole best challenge here since we don't really have to worry about survivorship. We get to keep full lineage of our profiles and all their related data. We get in the unified profile, it's an interpretation of how that data comes together. And then how we activate is by using those attributes in important ways through segmentation, activation, insights, and so on. So when you're describing how the unified profile works with your customers, think of using a key ring as an analogy. In the real world, a key ring, it's really just a collection of keys. We all have them. What's on them, right? Aside from Legos and maybe fidgets and all the fun stuff, typically keys. Keys to hide to handle all types of things like your house, your car, your office, and so on. And all these keys, they've got personal value. They've got function to whoever that holder of the key ring is. And they all have precise value associated with those specific things, right? My house key, it cannot unlock my neighbor's house. At least I hope it can't. Nor can my car key start anybody else's car. They're unique, they're personal, they're valuable. And then they govern access to valuable things, my house, my car, my office. Nor can these keys be used interchangeably, even though they're associated with me. I can't use my car key to get into my house. They can also change over time. So last year I sold my car. I got a new vehicle, and at that time, the old key came off that key ring, and a new one came on. And that was once associated with me now gets associated to someone new. That key ring is the thing that keeps all these things together. So kind of along those lines, instead of having keys to my car, my house, my office, my shed, a unified profiles key ring has keys that are linked to different systems. And each one contains information about an individual. I've got a commerce platform, service CRM platform, marketing cloud, possibly external systems too, like payroll, core banking systems. Each key is my link to information that's kept in those systems, just like my car key gives me access to my car. And they're unique to each system, and I can't exactly use an identifier from one system to access information in another. So the process of identity resolution essentially takes each of those separate representations of a person or an account and it links them together in a key ring. That unified profile is that key ring. Now, the unified profile itself, it has limited utility, right? I get a unique identifier for this profile, but I can't access any connected system with that unified profile any more than I could open my car door with an actual key ring. I actually need the key on the car to open the car door, and I need my service cloud contact ID to access service records. So just like when I sell my car and my keys change, information within a system can change. And if it does, then sometimes my understanding of how my profiles are linked can also change. It means that my keys are portable. It doesn't invalidate my keyring. It just means that the linking of information has changed. So when new profiles appear in my commerce platform and they're associated with my CRM data, well, new keys get added to that unified profile keychain. When my data improves and my assumption of how the information is consolidated changes, then they connect to they connect to a profile that may move from one profile to another. So we can see that this is a system that's constantly changing. Keys can come on, keys can come off, and the value of that ring is how these keys get linked together. But one record from one system for one person is not typically how data gets connected, right? Things are often a lot more complicated, and sometimes we're going to get duplicate records coming in from multiple systems. That's normal. That happens. A lot of times there's unintentional duplication through things like bad data hygiene, inefficient processes, poor validation. But profiles can also end up getting linked together in intentional ways. Maybe I've got different brands or different subsidiaries that have different representations of a contact. Maybe I'm a university, and in that case, I could be having multiple different statuses and systems. I could be a grad student, an alum, a donor. I could teach as an adjunct member of the faculty while also being full-time staff. In healthcare, I could be both a patient and a provider. So when we build a unified source of reference for our enterprise and most importantly, our Salesforce stack, we won't be set up for success with a mindset that thinks of this model as something that needs to be enforced in every connected system. Every system that we're going to connect is going to have its own data model, its own representations of a customer. And we're not trying to disrupt that. We're not trying to manage that through Data Cloud. our value that we're bringing is truly providing that source of reference to all those connected systems so that their processes are more informed off of the unified data rather than being a centralized system that's managing data in each one of those source systems. So in commerce, for example, every order is the source of truth for order updates, and we have to use the PII that's being shared within each order. It wouldn't make sense to change that or try to propagate changes to those different records from that data. And in marketing, each contact gets essentially treated as its own contact point. They have their own record, they have their own history of engagement that's tied to each one of those contact points, and consent is also tied to that as well. So, it wouldn't just be a bad idea to overwrite that with propagated values, it'd be downright counter to their privacy and consent laws. So beyond what I've already said about, the value of retaining lineage, what else is useful about this keyring concept? Well, for starters, it aligns with the reality for how current enterprise systems are architected. You can ingest data, you can get insights on it, you can act on it without having to worry about disrupting data ownership structures and processes. You get to integrate systems faster when you don't have to enforce control and survivorship of records. And since we aren't talking about enforcing control and just creating an interpretive model, it tends to have less resistance within organizations and could find itself being adopted faster than something like MDM. It also takes off the table the need to squabble over who's got the best data and whose records survive. That also goes for things like merges and splits. That's no longer a concern of at least Data Cloud, as in doesn't take into the it doesn't take the subject of merges and splits off the table entirely, but it doesn't make it an organizational hurdle that needs to be overcome. It's just a system of record problem, which is probably where it needs to stay. It also means it's adaptable. Data landscapes change incredibly fast in organizations. You can't always wait for, all of the different decision makers to completely align on all of the objects and fields in one harmonious moment, in the hope that your consolidation rules are going to stay undisturbed. They won't. Systems get added, rules change, stakeholders get, new stakeholders come into the play. And so, the reason that MDM has a smaller scope of systems is it's just really hard to keep track of all of that data moving at levels below it, like websites, lead generation forms, various marketing platforms, limited scope. It's also easier to conceptualize and manage. There's so many ifs and ands and hierarchies that have to exist in an MDM system. With a keyring, you get to sidestep all of that with just a flexible interpretation of a unified profile. So to kind of hammer the point in, when you get back to that first slide when I was talking about all those contacts getting flattened, with Data Cloud, you don't lose any of that. Everything gets retained in a unified profile from all of the source systems. The information on each of the contact records gets to stay perfectly intact with perfect lineage showing you which system generated what. And so instead of having to rely on a system, where we kind of trust the best records created, everything else gets destroyed. We have data management methods where nothing gets lost at all. So, hopefully now we have, sort of get the idea that the UUID, Unified Individual, it's an artifact of the unification process. It can change. It's mutable. And that's because the first priority when we're stitching profiles together correctly, it's accuracy. That's our number one profile, or sorry, number one priority is accuracy. We want to make sure that we're linking together the correct profiles. To that end, once you go live in your initial rules launch, you might need to make adjustments to those rule sets. Pardon me. Sorry, I'm coming over a cold here. Okay, what was I talking about? Oh, that's right. Production. If you need to make adjustments to your rule sets, you can have a second rule set in Data Cloud. You can test those outcomes, make modifications, look at those different results that come from your test rule set, and then apply those to your production data set when you're ready, to sort of establish confidence in those that matching logic before you put it into play. Stability here is a second priority. Remember that those unique identifiers, they can change, and when they do, it's typically a sign that that the assignment for that profile, it's improved. It's improved, but not always. Our quality improves, if our quality improves, if new sources get added, it's possible that those UIDs could change. But those UUIDs, they could also change when you make changes to your rule set. We build some rules to keep these identifiers stable, but again, they're not meant to be used as a golden record. They can change. So I'll kind of end with an analogy on how the unified profile kind of really enhances our understanding of data and then what features add value and where. Let's start with systems of record that get mapped to our data model objects. The data gets brought in, it's context to that other related data, it's available, it's organized, and we understand where each record comes. This system works, but without relationships to other systems of record and other profiles, we don't get any correlated insights across those systems. Think of a branch. Within itself, everything gets connected. But we know it's part of a larger whole. We just can't quite make that connection yet. The unified profile helps us make that connection. When you unify profiles and you get linkages between all the connected data, through that unified link, you get so much more. You still have data that's connected in each DMO, so it's still contextual. And then the lineage is intact with each tie to each source system. Now you can think, you can link those things together. You get the benefit and value of correlated insights across those sources. I like to think of multiple branches here coming together in this example, like a tree. Let's compare that against what you might get from a golden record in an MDM system. Do you have context retained in that system? No, because it gets lost when it gets mushed together. Do you get lineage, an understanding of each contributing source that lends that to the data into a unified profile? Again, no, because we're in a survivorship model that's pushing attributes down and we lose track of anything. So rather than a branch or a tree in this case, you get mulch. It's mushed up data. It might be valuable in some cases, but you have no idea what came from where, anywhere. So I'll end on this. The unified profile, it's far more valuable than MDM in the sense that it's a flexible, live interpretation of the current state of data in an organization. And when your data improves, like a customer calls in, asks you to correct their information, like Mr. R2 did, their assignment improves. This allows each system to kind of govern themselves while giving you a model of data to understand and reference at any time. It's more flexible than MDM, it's far cheaper to implement, and it can have a much broader footprint in terms of the data that can be managed under it. And you don't have to get the entire company to align and stay aligned on survivorship and mastery rules on an ongoing basis. So let's talk about how we use that next. Let's talk about how we can get some value out of that data once we built a unified profile in a practical use case for something like a CRM. And for that, I'm going to pass things off to Arvin to kind of take over from here.
Let me find my screen. Just 1 second.
And Arvin, I apologize. I got to step out for 1 second. I need a glass
Uh,
of water, and I'll be right back.
no worries. Do it. Just give me a second, guys. I'm in my office today, and I'm trying to just make sure it shows up in the right monitor. And okay. Sure, sure, sure. All right. Hopefully, you guys can see the right screen. I think so. Yes. All right. So, up to now, we have kind of talked about, some use case discovery, the discovery process, the power of the unified profile. But really, in the end, right, the reason that, customers or they're using Data Cloud, and then they're trying to do something with it to sort of get value from it. So, with that, I'm going to kick off things with a poll because we've been talking for a while. And if I can find my poll. Mhm. All right. So here's a use case. Your customer is they want to show the sales rep a list of unified opportunities along with two different calculated insights that has been tabulated. One is the opportunity score and then a lifetime value. And this is for a unified individual on the contact record in the Sales Cloud instance. So there are some viable options here. So which one would you, now that you have, that they have data cloud, you understand data cloud, which one would you recommend? Option one is to create a segment of your unified individual, and then basically activate that back to CRM. Option two is to access the unified individual in CRM using a Lightning Web component, to the API. Option three is to create a segment of your unified individual, activate that back to a cloud file storage, and then import that back into CRM. Option four is to use data actions and the Salesforce flow to kind of update the contact record. And then the last option is to use the data cloud CRM enrichments or copy field capabilities to copy those values to the contact record. Now, all of these are plausible options. I am waiting to at least see if we get a, a bit more participation. So I guess which one would you recommend as you are thinking through these, the implementation? All right, I am going to end the poll as I feel. So as I said, most of these are plausible options, apart from one. I'm going to share the results. So let's kind of talk through this. So option number one, like that is the invalid option, like because there is no way to create a segment and actually activate that how you would. So we can rule that out. So let's table option number two for now, which is the right one. But let's talk about the others, like why would that not be? So option number third, which is to create a segment and then activate that to a cloud file storage that has been done before, and then you want to, you import that back into CRM. But all of like option three, four, and five, all of these are actually taking the lifetime value, the opportunity score, and physically storing that value within your CRM as object, right? So on the contact record. In this case, your use case is all it's saying is I want to show my sales rep a list. It's not looking to say that, well, you need to. So just think about it. Like if at the point that your sales rep is logging into CRM, they are opening their sales console or their service console, they want to see the latest and greatest value. The best pattern, like, is going to be go look at Data Cloud to get the latest value and to display that. So that's why, and also if you think of it even from a optimal design wise, using the API, even from a design wise, that'll be a more optimal because it's only going to hit that one record to actually get that data back. So it's a point of retrieval. All of the other options are actually storing the value within CRM. So if I, look at data actions and flow or even the copy field capability, that's going to run a process. And for all your contact records, it's actually going to run a data action or even the copy field, which behind the scenes uses the same data action framework to actually copy that value in CRM. So now, in some instances, there might be plausible like reasons on why you might want the data from Data Cloud to actually live within CRM to actually be stored, but this is not one of those. So just being able to use the API, being able to display within your CRM, like it's a very strong value for why you want to use CRM. So let's kind of, so that's the is sort of option that we would recommend is like at the point that somebody is interacting with your CRM console, you go to Data Cloud to get the latest and greatest. All right, you know what actually, I'm going to come back to the break. So there are a few different ways to sort of what we call activate your data or make use of your data, right? So, here are some different patterns. Some of the that is off here, but we will fix that. So even being able to have analytics and insights. So now you can use things like data cloud reports and dashboard, being able to create insights on them, calculate insights. That's a way of getting value from your data. And then in terms of being able to act on your data, so segmenting that, activating that to your activation targets, be it your marketing channels or your advertising channels, that's a way. Also, using things like the data actions and platform events, and in this case, even copy field, where those are all sort of ways to sort of get value. And then third, but is also being able to use machine learning, right? So using Einstein Studio model builder for low code predictive model, or you can bring your own model using an external ML framework like SageMaker or Google Vertex. And then last but not the least, like this is where being even able to consume CRM or sorry, consume Data Cloud is a way of getting value from Data Cloud, right? So the use case we talked about of using Lightning Web Components or using the API or even within Agentforce using Prompt Builder, all those are, in terms of how you can get value or the type of use cases you can drive on your data on Data Cloud. Now, as we look at sort of CRM and Data Cloud, right, there's a few different integration patterns. There is no code options, low code options, as well as pro code options, right? So no code options are things like being able to do use Data Cloud related list, right? So right now you can enhance your leads and contact records with any of your Data Cloud related data, as well as copy field, where you can have a process to copy the data from CRM into, also come Data Cloud into CRM. And then we also have your Lightning, your DMOs within Data Cloud that you can customize using Lightning App Builder. In terms of low code options, we have being able to use them in Salesforce flow with things like Data Cloud triggered flows, as well as using them, creating a data actions that can plug into a Salesforce platform event, which you can then consume through Salesforce flow as well. And last but not the least is more of the pro code options are things like we have full API, Apex, as well as Connect API through SOQL Apex, using the Data APIs. So there are different ways in terms of how you can integrate CRM or how you can, um, Data Cloud. So now before we go on to the next section, which is on architectural considerations, let's take a quick 15-minute break. So in my clock, it is 12:55 Eastern. Let us come back at 1 Eastern, if that works, okay? And I'm gonna put you guys on, sorry. So we'll be back at 1:10 Eastern time. So it is 12:56. So see you guys in about 15 minutes. All right, we'll get started in 17 seconds. All right, let's get started back again. All right, so where we talk about was kind of some implementation considerations. Now let's kind of talk about some key architectural considerations as you look at your data cloud implementations, you know. I'm gonna skip. So, I mean, there are a few key sort of topics I want to touch upon. So I'm gonna skip on this, but actually, you know what? Let's hone in on that, right? So you've seen the other slide before on how data cloud works. This is sort of giving you an enterprise an architecture view on the different components of data cloud, you know, in terms of our data streams, in terms of, you know, the connectivity to other Salesforce clouds, as well as what some of the data frequencies are that you're, you know, between data ingestion as well as between those integration touch points. So, so there's a few key things I want to talk about, you know, in terms of the investments, especially these are architectural things that you would need to think about in your implementation. So one of the big investments we made last year, and that you may have heard a lot about, is our zero copy partner network. So what is this? So this our zero copy partner network is basically the way that we can connect to these cloud data lakes like the Snowflakes, Databricks, AWS Redshift, Google BigQuery, Azure, without having to copy the data over. You know, and that's works both for federations, that is for data ingestion, as well as for being able to share that data back as well, you know. So like, why is that important, right? So let's kind of look at some, you know, some key sort of things that you would have to. So when you are creating a zero copy data ingestion, there are a few different patterns that you can use. So one is a standard zero copy, whereby you know, so at this point, no data is being copied over. All data cloud has is is like a metadata. And then the next option is something called as acceleration or caching. That's something you set up when you are setting up the data stream itself. And so what this and how do they operate? So standard zero copy basically issues sends a query to your cloud data lake. The data lake will process the query and then it'll return the specific result. In this case, the data lake is computing for every query that you do. With caching, again, on the initial instance, Data Cloud will request all the rows. The data lake will send all the object data, and now Data Cloud has a cache of it, and then you can set up like how frequently do you want to refresh that cache, right? Like I think the options are every 12 hours. So, you know, there are some, you know, design situations. So what is good for what, right? So the standard zero copy, right, is good for, you know, things like your fact tables, small objects where the data is constantly changing or getting updated. Whereas acceleration is good for, you know, where the data is sort of constantly, or it's more of dimensional data, right? So as well as your large objects. So think of contacts, accounts, some, you know, some of those. Um, Again, the key thing I want you to keep in mind is like, how do you, um, as you know, a lot of the data cloud, data services credits works on a based on the number of rows processed. I guess one thing that I would just want you to keep in mind is the rows that are retrieved by data cloud is not necessarily equal to the rows processed, as in the sense that when data cloud is issuing a query to the cloud data lake, it might be processing more rows, and then the what gets returned is based on the predicate or whatever sort of logic that you're applying. So think of it when you're doing your segmentation, right? So these are principles that you would need to apply. So when you are designing your, especially if you are working with the cloud data lakes like Snowflake or Databricks, again, you would need to sort of, if you have a chance, like how do you make your design, your operational view there so that it gets easier to consume within Data Cloud? What do we mean by that, right? As you know, Data Cloud is a highly normalized data model. So if you need to map that data, the more normalized it is, it's easier for map. Again, if it's not, you have options within Data Cloud of doing transformations and other means. But again, this just makes your implementation easier. So what are some implementation patterns for zero copy, right? So what are some best practices? So one is build out your operational view. So Data Cloud itself, it charges for rows that are retrieved, but your lakehouse is also going to charge for all the rows that are being processed on that side. So again, only focus on the object and field that you directly need to support the use case. Uh, Second is limit the scope, to create those operational views so that you can reduce your row reads as well as latency. Um, and then also just design your Snowflake or your star schema with intent, right? So separate out if possible, and you have the opportunity, separate out your fact tables from your dimension tables. Consider caching or using acceleration on your dimension tables, right? So these are just some high level guidelines. And then recently, what we also released is our zero copy file federation. So you're like, well, like you just talked about zero copy. What does this mean? So earlier on, what Zero Copy was doing was something called query federation. So that is when you would do a zero copy and you go into Snowflake, we were issuing a query to Snowflake. And what we just recently released is something called file federation. So now we no longer have to issue a query to Snowflake, but we can directly go at the file level itself to actually go and get that data. So what is that? How does that work, right? So earlier, so if you issue a query like customers who purchased jackets in the last year, Data Cloud would create the query, make a call into Snowflake using query predicates, and then get that back. Whereas now with file-based federation, we are directly able to go, at the file level itself. But there are a key thing to buy. Typically, when if you these for these da- data lakes cloud, they are based on iceberg tables, based on some iceberg partition. So for us to even go at the file level, it's typically is based on whatever that you're partitioning on, right? Typically, like it's a date field or something where those files are being stored. So Data Cloud will go and access the entire file from the Snowflake. So if you ask me, or if you ask us, when should you use what, right? Like in terms of, so query federation, typically we've seen is your data volume is in the hundreds of millions of rows. From a credit wise, you have both the data cloud cost component as well as the compute that you're doing on the cloud data lake. Whereas with file federation is great for higher volume data stores. In this case, since we're able to directly go to the file level within Snowflake, there is no cost per se from compute wise on the Snowflake side, right? Because we are able to act on it or get to it directly at the file level. The only thing I want you to keep in mind is it is based on whatever is the partition key that is being created within the Snowflake and the Databricks of the world. All right. Other thing that we released last year is something called Data Cloud One. So really, Data Cloud One is our, in terms of how do you simplify or make your data cloud access across your different Salesforce orgs in a seamless manner. So it went live last year. It redefines multi-org architecture. For those of you who have been with the journey with us, we used to always say, hey, if you're trying to implement this use case, is this in the home org or in an external org? Because there were some considerations. Now with Data Cloud One itself, you can seamlessly access all of your data in any of your Salesforce, what we call as companion org. So be it the home org as well as any of those connected org. So how does it work? So uh, earlier on, from a multi-org connectivity wise, you would have to, there were some baseline capabilities, but in any companion or any other Salesforce org, you would typically have to use the APIs or Lightning Flow to be able to access that. Now with Data Cloud One, we create a metadata of all of your data cloud in all the different Salesforce orgs itself. So we have a copy of metadata. So now you can come into any Salesforce org, and then, for example, any of those, what we call as companion orgs, you can create your segments, you can create your insights, and it'll act as if it is natively acting in that org. And the way it works behind the scenes is this concept of data spaces. So basically, within Data Cloud, as you know, you can create different data spaces. Those data spaces are shared with your companion orgs through what's called as a companion connection, at which point we copy all the different metadata for data cloud, and now you have that within the companion org. So things like calculated insights, segmentation, activation, analytics, and they all will work seamlessly as if you're in your or just like how it works in the home org. uh, and just from a process wise, there is a few steps to be followed. You typically have to work with your account team or the Salesforce team. There is a $0 data cloud companion or SKU that needs to be added. And then at that point, you can connect those other Salesforce orgs as companion connections. You can share one or more data spaces with those orgs. And then at that point, all of the metadata gets starts to get synced, and then you can grant your end users access to those shared data spaces, at which point your end users can access those data cloud objects within those companion orgs seamlessly and start to build insights, segments, prompts. Just to bear in mind for those customers who already where where they already had multiple data cloud, or if an existing org was already in home org, there is a process involved to deprovision that so that it can be used now as a companion org. So you would have to create a case with Salesforce support so that they can kickstart that process off. So here are just some of the high-level use case for how you might be able to leverage Data Cloud One within your implementations, right? So from cross-selling, getting the customer 360 view, doing the combined forecasting or opportunity, being able to use cross-org and analytics. So all these, especially in the Salesforce world where we were doing, in the past where it was not uncommon to do org to org integration. Now with Data Cloud One, it really sort of helps streamline that process. All right. Now let's talk about the other big buzzword of the last year, which is unstructured data. So as you know, especially in this agentic world, an agent force needs both structured as well as your unstructured data to be able to, act on it, right? And to be able to respond better, respond back knowledge. So think of all the richness you have within your PDF documents and your chat transcripts. Like, how do you use that to ground your agent, as well as give it the right context? So um, Data Cloud comes built in with a vector database, so which lets you turn your unstructured data easily into meaningful insights, right? For those who already played around with it, if you have, used or to upload a PDF document, even into something called as Agentforce data libraries, that behind the scenes is using the Data Cloud Vector database. So how does it work? So again, when I talk about unstructured data, there are different ways. One is there is your unstructured data as in your PDF documents, there's also unstructured data or uh, within a structured data source. So think of your fields like description, which is like a free form text field. So all that can also be unstructured. Data Cloud can chunk it, transcribe it, and then categorize it. At which point we vectorize it, and then we store it in our vector database by creating like an index and a chunk. And at that point, you can either create like a search index where then we create retriever. So there is no code retrievers, and you have different options you can apply in terms of how you want to retrieve the data in terms of being able to do things like semantic searches or hybrid searches. And then you can start to use them, within your agent force or also within the query engine as well. So why does this benefit, right? So again, this is just sort of a use case. So if your human agent is sort of working on support cases, in the past, they would have to kind of dig through your knowledge base to look at like-minded, like if for a question like, are there minimum loan sizes for equipment financing? They're either looking through your knowledge base or they're asking the different teammates, at which it that takes time to complete. Now with Data Cloud and Agent Force, they have all that, so they can just ask the Agent Force for answers. At which point Agent Force can access all of your unstructured data to the ground. It's able to search on it and then quickly get those responses back. So how does Data Cloud Agent Force RAG work? So I think I kind of covered this, but basically once all of your unstructured data is there within Data Cloud, we basically have chunked and indexed it, at which point it can be used by the RAG pipeline to either query it or to apply it to your prompts as well. So RAG within Data Cloud is fairly easy to set up. Like it's no code setup. You can, or even within using Agentforce data library, it's fairly easy to set up. So there's no click. But RAG is also pretty easy to set up wrong, right? So if your agent provides wrong answer, the first thing that your customer is going to tell you is, well, like it doesn't work, or agent force is no good, or why am I getting 70% of the answers are wrong, or my case data is not properly, so often enough, the fact is there's a lot, even though it's easy to set up, there's a lot that goes behind the scenes, right? So the way so is you may also have, even before you bring that data into Data Cloud, you might, do some offline prep on it, right? Like in terms of how do you want to chunk it? Like, is it like a table format data? How do you want to embed it? And then, within Data Cloud itself, I'm going to just sort of skip through this. Within Data Cloud itself, there are different causes for why that data may not be properly. So one could be that the content was not properly retrieved by RAG, or it could be that the content was not properly hydrated within your prompt, or it could be that your content like was not used, but the end solution seems to be that it's not. Um, and the reason for this could be it's missing content, or there is imprecise embedding, or the query that you have applied is not proper. So the key thing to take away is, right, just thoughtlessly adding data to an agent force data library or your prompts is expecting RAG to just work uh, out of the box, right? So there has to be some thought process or design choices on how you want to use it. So things like content curation, data shaping, as well as how do you configure your search indexes, how do you create your retrievers. Again, like we won't dive a bit depth into it. We did release, I think it was a couple of months ago, a white paper on RAG best practices. Here is the short link. So that uh, white paper has 40 plus best practices for how you want to, right? So, the high level cliff notes is, right, basically, for example, index long form text field, use things like prepending, pre-filtering, and prompt augmentation. Again, ADL is great, like it works out of the box, but it doesn't give you a lot of granular capability, right? So, but then you can always set up RAG manually, no code, using external file storage within Data Cloud. Um, Let us look at some, yeah, you know what? Let me open up a poll real quick. Now, there are different type of searches within Data Cloud. There is hybrid search, vector search, as well as keyword search. Phone. All right. So I'm going to ask you, if I am doing a search on what would yield similar results and be optimal for how do I log into my account, as well as how do I sign on? Is it a hybrid search? Is it a vector search or a keyword search? All right. So the right answer is vector search for this. And why is that? Um, Vector search basically understands that both those are similar query, right? So, and then it's going to bring it back. Now, hybrid search will also work because hybrid search combines vector and keyword searches. But since it's doing both keyword and hybrid, it'll process a bit more rows. So here, the ideal one would be to do a vector search. Uh, Again, we get asked like, so this is specifically on Agentforce data. Like, when do I use Agentforce data libraries versus the third file cloud storage, right? So if you're trying to use Salesforce knowledge, again, Salesforce knowledge, or you're just trying to upload file from your desktop, so it's great for simple, quick proof of concepts, proof of technology, and small amount of files, as well as there are some file size limitations as well. Whereas now with the third party cloud file storage, we do support multiple format from docs, presentation, HTML, PDFs. We do automatic transcriptions. You get more granular control on file management. And then you can also convert any semi-structured text object within Data Cloud and vectorize that as well. So again, there are different type of indexes you can create, from your vector indexes to hybrid indexes. So hybrid basically combines the best of vector and your keyword searches, to kind of give you those better results. Here are just some high level tips in terms of you have more options in terms of when you are configuring your search retrievers. So when you create a search index within Data Cloud, it automatically creates a retriever for you. But then you can come in there and create your own custom retrievers on top of it, and apply things like pre-filtering or metadata in terms of what gets returned. I would just say this: with unstructured data, it can be a lot to sort of take in. So I would say start small, right? So use easy to integrate tools like an Agentforce data library, and be very intentional about your data sources, as well as keep it very contextual, right? So retrievers can pre-filter based on the available metadata. You can create DLOs of your unstructured data by different categories. And then again, typically I would say opt for hybrid searches over vector because it combines the best of both worlds, that is keyword as well as vector search. All right. Other things that's not talked about as much, but it's very relevant, especially in implementation, is now sandboxes. So last year we finally released Data Cloud in sandboxes, right? So now you can build, test, and deploy Data Cloud in a secure environment. So just like you're used to on the CRM side to be able to, create a sandbox, deploy your changes, and then migrate that. It works very similar for Data Cloud as well. The big sort of difference is, the way it works is step one is you can create or refresh a sandbox. Your sandbox gets provisioned. At that point, Data Cloud only copies the metadata, but you would need to then hydrate all of your sandbox with the data connections. We don't copy over the data. So it's a great way for you to test out your integrations, your DevOps processes. And then there are different ways in terms of how you configure or data cloud packaging, right? So you can either do it within the Salesforce admin UI, you can deploy stuff with our metadata API, as well as now with data cloud packaging and data kits as well. So what are some key use cases for using Sandbox, right? I mean, it's for testing out data cloud, testing out your agent force for end user training, testing out your integrations from CRM integrations, platform integrations, as well as third party. Um, and then within the Salesforce Sandbox world, there are different sandbox capability. So there's the partial copy sandbox, full copy sandbox, or a full sandbox, right? So again, here just some high level guidelines for like use case gathering and proof of concept. You might start with like a partial copy sandbox, whereas for something like where you're trying to do complete end-to-end testing, you might do a full sandbox. All right. Now let's talk about data cloud governance. So as I talked earlier, earlier this year, we launched, where now the data cloud governance portfolio. So you've always been able to bring your data, map your data, unify it. Now you can also govern it as well. So what is data cloud governance, right? So there are different capabilities within the data cloud governance. So there is uh, policy-based governance where you can apply access policies, masking policies, data use policies. There's also tagging and classification. We have always had data space management, and there's also the platform encryption. So now here is what, at a very high level, is what the data cloud governance product portfolio looks like. So we've always had data spaces which lets you segregate data based on or data metadata by brand, business unit, region. There's also now AI tagging and classification where you can automate the labeling and organization of data, sort of using AI recommended tags. And then really access policies where now this comes and lets you do more. This might be the most closest to what you might expect in CRM, like from a role-based access control or from the sharing rules perspective. And then there's also security framework in terms of platform encryption, where you can now bring your own keys as well as using a private connect for data cloud to be able to connect to your own data services. So what is data spaces? Again, which with this legs lets you as an organization leverage one single instance of data cloud. You can segregate based on brand BU. It's not meant to be strictly a data like a true data partitional. It's more of a logical partition. Uh, AI tagging classification is again is where we launch, where now you can easily tag and classify all your data and metadata, and then you can propagate those tags to ensure that your data is being governed at scale. And then policy-based governance is where now you can start to apply access policies in terms of who has access to what type of data, and then you can centrally manage all of the governance. Again, this just launched recently. Some of you, I don't think it's out yet in the DevOps yet, but it soon will be. But it's something to keep in mind, especially as you come across in your data cloud implementation. Um, Now, let me do a quick poll in terms of another poll. All right. Question is, so this is a use case. If a global retailer wants to control data access for a brand within a brand for the different end user persona, which mechanism would you recommend? Is it data spaces or is it policy-based governance? All right. So the answer is policy-based governance. Again, data spaces operates at a brand level. The use case here is within one brand, they for different end users within the brand who have access, they want to control data access. And the way that you would solve for that is policy-based governance. So when do you use data spaces versus policy-based governance? Again, spaces is more, think of it at a very macro level. So logical separation of data without you needing multiple orgs. It simplifies sort of multi-region and multi-brand operations. Whereas policy-based governance now helps with managing access within one brand or region for different persona. Now you can give it granular level access control at an object, field, or role level. So really, in the use case here for the retailer who wants within one brand in terms of from an end user perspective, who sees what, is going to be policy-based governance. All right, let's talk about data cloud credits. Before I do that, I guess how well do you understand data cloud credits? I know I'm just trying to get a sense. There is no right or wrong answer here. So as you know, data cloud is our one of our first consumption-based products, and it works on consumption-based pricing. Or so, what does it really mean, right? So, customers get a set amount of credits, and as you are working with and using Data Cloud, it draws down on those credits, and then customers can always re-up and buy more credits. Think of back in the days when we had those cell phone plans where you got a set number of minutes and then you would draw down on those. So it works very similarly. So what is the primary metric in the data cloud consumption model? The primary metric is something called rows process. So this is again, it's not rows retrieved, it's rows process. So this is the expected row count for the different processes that run within data cloud. So think ingestion, query, transformation, and the benefit to the customer and you is like scalability and transparency. So as you're out there trying to estimate, right, like how many credits do I need? In fact, I think we just launched recently an external facing calculator tool too, but like how do you estimate, right? So there are three main sort of one is like, as I'm trying to connect my data, like how much data is being ingested, how much of that will be streaming versus how much will be batch? Is there a zero copy system involved? Um, how many rows of engagement data? What is the expected volume of growth? And then as you think about harmonization and unification, it's like, will you use INT resolution? How many segments? Will you, create many different, transformations, so batch transform or streaming transforms? And then as we talk about acting on your data, what are you going to show your end users? Um, what sort of automations or activation? So these are just some things that we like to keep in mind. Again, we say, right, try to estimate your queries opposed to at a holistic level, at more at a use case level. So one is, what business objective or what are you trying to solve for? They'll give you what data sources do you need, and then what is my data foundation look like? So what does my data architecture look like? Do I need to create rules within data cloud for transformation on for other? And then what is going to be my volume and frequency, right? So how frequently is this data changing? Am I uploading a new file every day? What is the delta change? So these are some factors in terms of how try to estimate those credits. Now, here's a rate card, or here's a data pipeline, right? Again, like you don't need to memorize it, but it's all documented on our help site. But just a few sort of rule, right? Typically, not typically, but streaming is going to be more expensive like than that. So if you look at the data pipeline, which is the second row down, so that's for bringing external data pipeline in. So that's for bringing external data in. For million rows process, batch is going to be 2,000 credits, whereas streaming is going to be 5,000 credits, right? If you look at identity resolution, is what's called as profile unification. That is a million rows. Sorry, that is 100,000 credits per million row process. So that's one of our more expensive credit utilization. And in fact, just like as of 2 months ago, April 15th, we actually reduced the internal data pipeline credit type, which is basically for us to connect to data from CRM, marketing cloud engagement, marketing cloud personalization, B2C commerce by a factor of 75%. So now it only uses 500 credits for million rows from CRM. So again, these are all the different query types, right? Now, based on the process that you run within Data Cloud, it's going to sort of use what type of query you need. And this kind of gives you like the different, I guess, within your Data Cloud lifecycle, different processes. And this gives you a visualization on what are those consumption levels as your data moves through your life cycle, right? So you have your batch data pipeline, your streaming data pipeline, your transforms as you're connecting and preparing your data. And then for unification, that's going to be 100,000 credits. And then you have your insights to be able to analyze and predict. And then for being activating them, you have your segmentation and activation credits. Um, and then here is again the same view of the Salesforce Data Cloud architecture, but this is going to give you a consumption-based view based on what processes are running. So let's say about how do we estimate consumption, right? So I would say one thing, especially as you're working with your client, you can start to use some of those tools that we have, and but for your final, like I would say, more of a pricing is work with your account team, right? Because in the end, because there are estimation levels as well as discounting levels in terms of trying to get you that final price point. So think we covered this. So again, I'm not trying to make us do heavy math, but I want us to just like for you to kind of think about based on the use case described, like how many credits you think will get you. So uh, the use case here is hold on, let me see here. Is All right. So the use case here is your customer is trying to ingest your customer profiles from an S3 bucket. So that's 2 million rows, and they're trying to ingest 1 million records from your CRM instance. And they also want to do an INT resolution where they're doing an exact match on email address, fuzzy match on first name, exact match on last name. Again, um, estimating credit is part art and part science. So I'm not looking for an exact number, but more for what do you think will be the number of credits that's used, like range wise? And this is only for their first run. I know it's we are almost 3 hours in, but so please stay with us for a few more. And again, like I want to make sure again, you don't have to do the exact math, but just based on your gut feel as well as based on the rate card that we had shared earlier, what that range might be. I want to see some more responses. All right, I think. All right, so the range is going to be between the 300,000 through 350K credits. And the way we get that is to ingest 2 million rows from C CRM. The multiplier is 2,000 per million rows processed. That's going to be 400,000 credits. And then for ingesting from CRM, which is a million rows, it's about 500 credits. So that's going to, and then we are unifying sort of 3 million profile. So that's 2 million from CRM, sorry, 2 million from S3, 1 million from CRM. So that's going to process 3 million rows. And that is since it's per million rows, it's 100,000 credits at 3 million is going to be 304,000 credits. So that's what the range is in terms of how we get that calculation. So note for your profile unification, even though it goes against multiple DMOs, like your individual DMO, your contact point DMO, all of that just count as one, like one row processed. Now, let me ask you this. I guess this is more the goal here. Like, how would you change your solution if you know that 40% of the email addresses across both of your data sources are empty, right? So one of the options could be like you could clean your data so you can either remove the empty invalid data at your source systems even before you map it, or you do it where the Salesforce batch transforms, So now let's talk about as I re-estimate. So now let's re-estimate in terms of if I now need to do the same exact thing I did earlier, that is, I'm ingesting 2 million records from S3, 1 million from CRM, but now I'm also adding a data transforms to exclude the 40% invalid email records before I map them to my DMO, and then I have the same exact anti-resolution run. How many credits do you think it'll take this time around? All right. So the option, so it comes to about 150, 185,000 credits. So how is the calculation being done? So the fact is, so here's what the calculation looks like. By using batch transforms, we added about 1,200 credits to process those 3 million rows into a temporary DLO, which then gets mapped into my individual and contact point DMO. My ingestion from S3 and CRM stay the same. But now for my identity resolution rule set, since I am excluding 40% of record, it only has to process 1.8 million records, so not the entire 3 million, which means that it's only using 180,000 credits. So I guess the key point here, like, it's not the math, but by being able to analyze your source data and making those design choices, the same exact thing that we did earlier. Now, in this case, our first time run is only going to cost us 185,000 credits with a saving of over 118,000 credits. So basically, we are using 40% less credit consumption for the just by cleaning some data or and by using batch transforms to in terms of what gets finally mapped to my DMOs. So hopefully, like, this made sense. And then especially as you start working on implementation, I think these are the sort of design decisions that you have to come up with. So now let's kind of talk about how do you design for, especially as you think about optimizing for consumption, right? So data ingestion. So what is data ingestion? So data ingestion is basically to able to get data in. Uh, this is the data pipeline credits. It includes both batch as well as streaming. Batch from external is at a rate of 2,000 credits per million rows processed. Streaming is about 5,000 credits per million rows processed. So what are some recommendations here? So one is only bring in the data that you need. If you have an option, filter your data at the source prior to ingesting. Uh, Minimize your refresh and sync schedules, as well as use incremental refresh opposed to a full refresh when possible. By using incremental refresh, it will, it's only going to process the changed rows opposed to the entirety of your row set. And then also start simple, right, with batch ingestion. And then as your use cases evolve, you can add in streaming data. So again, sometimes like if you ask your customer how quickly do you want this data, their answer might be as fast as possible. But I think this is where we come in as consultants to be like, does the use case justify? Does it need to be batch? Does it need to be streaming? So those are the sort of design choices that you have to make. Um, Zero copy federation. Again, this is our zero copy again. Zero copy has two aspects of it. One is something called data federation. So that is for data in, right? So when your external data is queried, usage is calculated on the data cloud side based on the number of rows returned to data cloud. The second is something called data sharing. This is on the outbound side where you can set up data share rules within data cloud to show the number of rows that is going to be shared with Snowflake or with Databricks, and it's going to be based on the sharing rows accessed credit type. Um, so just a point here, there's if there is no credits consumed, if your external data lake region is in the same region cloud, right? So this is especially if you're in the AWS and they're the same, and I think that is documented in our website. This is only for the data sharing bit. Here are some recommendation is that again, where like I think we kind of talked about this earlier. Again, use an acceleration when possible for large data sets to minimize frequency, right? So here are some guidelines like we have seen, like optimal data volumes for acceleration is up to 20 gigabyte for Snowflake, and up to 10 GB for Google BigQuery. So this about translates to about 500 million rows in Snowflake and 100 million in BigQuery. Again, also you using predicates. So if you're using query-based file federation, then using the right where clause to kind of reduce the number of rows being accessed. Um, Data transform. So this is again, Data Cloud is not a meant to be used as a full-blown ETL tool, but it does have transformation capabilities, both from batch transforms to streaming transforms. Batch transforms is again, it was 2,000 credits per million rows process. Streaming transform is 5,000 credits. Um, the key thing to keep in mind is the rows process is going to be the combination of all the rows that you're using within your DLO. So, like an example, for example, if you're creating a batch transform on two different objects, one is your accounts that's coming from CRM has a million rows, and then invoice table that's coming from say S3 has 5 million rows. And if you're using transform, the rows process is going to be 6 million rows. Now, there's valid use cases like we talked about our scenario earlier where you wanted to filter out the invalid emails, right? So, but just keep in mind that it's going to be based on rows process. So what are some recommendation here? Again, try to consolidate your transforms when possible instead of creating a separate transform from each of your output nodes. Again, there's a option within batch transforms called incremental transform node. Use that when possible. Also, sometimes if the use case is more, hey, like I want to find out, is can you do that with using calculated insights or a formula fields? Again, you have to make that determination based on the use case and based on your implementation pattern. Uh, Calculated insights are again where calculated insights or insights within Data Cloud lets you create metrics, either multidimensional metrics or like streaming metrics. Just like earlier, if you are using a calculated insights on two different DLOs or DMOs, which has different rows, your rows process is going to be a combination or an addition of what those rows are. Just with streaming insights, I would say kind of keep that in mind. So as you may know, streaming insight, it runs based on our streaming data sources and is based on but if your streaming insight is doing any join back to a table that has a million, like multiple rows, it's going to be based on combination. So what we mean by that, say that you have a streaming window of every 10 minutes. And if your streaming has, say, 1,000 change rows, but your streaming insight itself is doing a join back to a table of a million rows, then every 10 minutes, it's going to be based on 1,000 plus that million rows it has to process. So again, it's in the end, it's all based on rows process. So what are some recommendation here is again, try to consolidate your calculated insights, and especially like you can use things like metrics on metrics or insights on insights. Again, in some cases, see if your use case really needs a streaming insight or could you use batch insights. Also within batch insight, you can minimize the refresh schedule. Also, a lot of the processes within Data Cloud, they just run, but now using Salesforce Flow, you can actually orchestrate in terms of how frequently you want to run those processes. Oh, okay, and let's talk about ID resolution. So this is our most expensive process that we run within Data Cloud. These credits, again, are based on rows processed, which includes rows modified or created for any change to your profile DMOs. So on day zero, it'll process the entirety, but from the next time anti-resolution runs is going to be based on only modified or new source profile. Also, any change to a related DMO. So in this case, if you have an individual DMO that is also mapped or to a contact point email, contact point phone, contact point address, as well as the party identification. So even though it's five different rows, like it's mapped to, it only count as one profile processed. What are some recommendation here? Again, is like I would say, it's only map the fields that you need for anti-resolution, as as well as anti-resolution by default will run, I think, four times a day or twice a day, but you can orchestrate that with Salesforce flow as well, right? So again, based on the use case, only run your an ID res jobs as frequently as you need them. Uh, Segmentation is the process by which, again, you can create a segment within Data Cloud and then activate them. Again, same as earlier, if you're creating a segment from your unified profile that say has a million rows and you're doing a drawing back to say your order table or your email click event table, the which has 10 million rows, the rows process is going to be 11 million. So it's not the number of rows returned in your segment, but more the rows process to kind of create the output of your segment. So what are some recommendation here? Again, minimize your edits. Try to first test it out by building it in Salesforce query editor, um, minimize your segment refreshes using flows. You can also pre-calculate, some values using calculated insights or batch transform. Also use things like nested segments. Other thing, you can use something called the look back settings. As you know, if you're using an engagement filter engagement field within your segment, you can set something called the look back filter to see how far that you want to go back. Now, the more you pick, the higher it'll be the number of those processed. Um, and then in activation, again, even though they're very similar, activation is the process by which once you create the segment, it's going to send that activated payload to your activation target. And if I remember right, I think segmentation is 20 per million rows process, whereas activation is 10 per million rows process. And what are some of the other, again, when you're activating, use the shortest path for your related attributes. Within your activation, you also have something called a refresh type or full versus incremental. Within your incremental refresh, you can set up an option to exclude records modified or removed since the last refresh, so it's not reprocessing them. And then again, if your activation is no longer being used, deactivate those. Um, Data graphs is another where, again, this is used. One is for agent force, but also for any of your API use cases where you need quicker access to the data. Your credit usage here is based on some of those process to kind of create or refresh that data graph. So again, when creating a data graph where you have a primary DMO and a related DMO, if your primary DMO has 1,000 rows, your related DMO has 2,000 rows, the total rows process is going to be 3,000. How do you, some recommendation is minimize your data volumes, for DMOs that's included in a data graph. Save your changes in draft mode especially during development until all of your configuration is finalized. Um, Other thing that's something like we don't, is within your segmentation canvas, there is, or within Data Cloud, when you're setting up your DMO, there is an option for something called value suggestion, right? Where now it's going to pick the top, I think, 1,000 commonly occurring values for a text wheels. So it makes it easier on your marketer. Now, enabling value suggestion also costs credit as well, right? So in terms of when you enable this, Data Cloud is going to query all rows in the DMOs, and then it'll query, so if five fields are selected in a DMO for value suggestion, it'll run a query for each of those fields. The more fields that you select for value suggestion, the more queries will execute. So again, I mean, now value suggestion is a very powerful capability within Data Cloud that makes it easier for you to segment, but again, as an implementer, sort of evaluate the value of the feature, balancing out what the credit consumption is. Um, and the last but not the least, I think, is like data queries, right? So this is when you're using the query API, where if when you say, hey, select field name one, field, first name, last name from my individual table, join back to my order table. The fact is, there is really no way for even us to kind of estimate query cost for a single query. You have to apply heuristic patterns. The only time you know what's going to be the rows process is in which where you don't have any where clause, because then it's reading or it's doing a full table scan or a full table read. Uh, Again, calculation is based on rows process. If you have a partition key, if you're using any of your partition keys within your where, that's going to give you not just better performance, but also reduce the rows process, because that's how our files within the iceberg or within a hyperlake or hyperforce is partitioned as well. So I guess, I mean, my point with all this is, right, I think in the earlier world as Salesforce architects or Salesforce implementation, I think it was always about let's design the best possible solution and not as much on what processes it runs or how many credits, because your customers and everybody was paying on a per user basis, right? Whereas now I think this is where us as implementers also kind of have design, hey, let's not just design the best possible solution, but also do it in a way that is cost effective, right? And I think especially as we work with other hyperscalers and cloud data lakes, like that's going to be a new skill set that we all add to our portfolio in terms of how do we just not uh, architect the right solution, but also a cost-effective solution as well. All right. With that being said, I think now it's time where we will give you time to kind of take away and take your quiz. So, Matt, are you still on?
I sure am, Marvin.
Okay, awesome. You want to talk them through the process? Let me make sure I have.
Yeah. Let me do that. Let me get my slides up. Give me one moment. I have that here in just a second. Okay. There we go. Hold on. Okay. So we are beginning the quiz portion of today's webinar. So this is a quiz that is going to be testing you based off of some of the content that we've covered today, validating that you understand some of the implementation best practices. The process and format for this is you're going to be going to the Partner Learning Camp to take this quiz. So the instructions for this are fairly simple, and you have to follow the instructions or it's not going to work. Step one, log into the Partner Learning Camp. That link that you see on the screen will take you straight to the Partner Learning Camp, sfdc.co/plc. Once you're logged in, use the second link. That link there, sfdc.co/dc-imp-expert-quiz. This is a short link that will take you to the specific course in the Partner Learning Camp where you can begin your quiz. It's important you do these in this proper order, because if you are not logged into the Partner Learning Camp first and you attempt that second link, you'll go to the home screen of the Partner Learning Camp and you won't go to the course. So please follow those steps in that order. Once you are have access to that particular course, complete all the modules of that course. There are three. There is one introduction, like a welcome step, and a congratulation step. Those need to be completed in order for the entire course, including the quiz, to be tracked as complete. So follow all three, steps one, two, and three. Log into the Partner Learning Camp, access the course within that second link, and then complete the quiz. The quiz is going to be 10 questions. There's no time requirements for it. It's all going to launch in your browser. And you need to get to, I believe, 70% correct questions, correct answers in order to pass this quiz. If you do not pass on the first time around, don't worry. You can retake this quiz as many times as you need to in order for that knowledge to kind of sink in order for you to understand the concepts that we have tried to teach today. So take the quiz as many times as you like. A few other notes here. Partner Learning Camp is only available to our consulting partners. If you are not currently a Salesforce consulting partner, you will not be able to access the Partner Learning Camp. And so you need to be able to log in using your firm's Salesforce CRM login in order to access the Partner Learning Camp. If you don't have one, if you're not sure if you have one, please reach out to your practice lead to make sure that you get appropriate access to the Partner Learning Camp. If you're not yet a Salesforce consulting partner, you can absolutely join our program. I will post a link in the chat for resources on how to join our, consulting partner program. I think that covers most of it. A couple other things you may encounter. If you complete the quiz and you don't see the course updating immediately in the Partner Learning Camp, refresh the screen. Typically, all it takes is a single page refresh, and then your completed quiz will show up within the course. That's all you need to do in order to complete the quiz requirement. So you'll have 20 minutes to do that. I'm going to start the timer now. And then, if you have questions, if you struggle, or if you're hitting a roadblock somewhere in the process, use the Q&A panel. Ask us a question. Let us know where you're struggling, and we'll be able to help you in that fashion. What we're going to do now for the remaining few minutes is to just kind of give you some peace and quiet to complete the quiz. Once you've completed the quiz, come on back. We're going to put up a survey form to kind of provide some feedback on how we did. Please fill that out and let us know how you enjoyed or the areas where we can improve. We always appreciate your feedback to help improve our processes and enablement programs. So that's the plan. And then in about 19 minutes, 20 minutes from now, Arvin and I will kind of wrap things up. Arvin, anything else you wanted to add?
Just want to say good luck, and you can try it multiple times, and we are here to support you, but we'll be quiet. Good luck.
Yeah. See you soon. All right, let me get through a few wrap-up things here. Thanks everybody for sticking around and completing the quiz. If you're still in the process of completing the quiz and need some time to focus, just put us on mute, and we'll check in with us a little bit later. If you've completed the quiz, congratulations. Please take a few extra minutes to provide some feedback to us from the end of survey, which is available here in your poll screen. And then a couple other things is if you need additional enablement on Data Cloud, we want to leave you with a bit of information here. So the first is to check out our Pocket Guide. Now, our Pocket Guide contains a lot of information about how to get expertise within your practice developed on Data Cloud. We list out a lot of resources in there, all sorts of videos, recorded webinars, hands-on activities, links to popular trailheads, videos from our product team members, and much, much, much more. All of that is available within our Pocket Guide. If we had a single source of truth for how we enable partners on Data Cloud, this would be it, our Pocket Guide. It's been recently moved to a different type of page format, so you can access the new link that's there. Next up, let's recap a little bit what we did today. In terms of the implementation expert process, this is a special navigator status that's available to your firm. Your part is to do a few things. Based on those requirements, if you want your partner to be recognized as an implementation expert, the things that you can do as an individual are make sure that you're certified in Data Cloud. If you're not yet certified in Data Cloud, there's a lot of great places to be able to work on that certification. We have a lot of recorded webinars explaining the entirety of the exam, the areas that you're going to expect to see from a content perspective, and then how to prepare your study to get ready for that exam. Once you're certified, becoming an implementation expert from your perspective, attending a workshop like this. Your attendance to this workshop counts towards that implementation expert status. Completing the quiz, which hopefully most of you have done by now, also counts towards that implementation expert status. The last thing that your firm needs to do is make sure that you're submitting completed data cloud projects within the partner community. This is something that can be handled within the business tab of the partner community. You have to submit the completed project and you have to submit a request for a customer satisfaction score, CSAT. So if you can do all those things, if you can get, five or more credentials in that relevant product, this case, Data Cloud, get 10 people within your firm to attend a Deliver Like Salesforce course, 10 individuals to earn 70% on that implementation, on that Deliver Like Salesforce quiz, the 10 completed projects with CSAT, and then 10 individuals completing this implementation expert workshop and also passing that quiz is how you will achieve that status. There's a lot of different products that you can earn implementation expert status on. They're all listed here. And this, again, this is a credentialing tool that shows that you're firmly committed to not just Data Cloud, but the broader Salesforce ecosystem, and that you're delivering satisfaction for your customers. It's a proof point for your customers to understand the value that you're bringing as a trusted partner of Salesforce. A couple other things. Thanks for sticking with us. This is a lot to ask for a Tuesday afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are in the world, and so we want you to be able uh, to share that with others. Uh, to that end, we have a badge that you can share on social media. So download that badge today, grab the QR code that's available on this screen, or go to the short code to access that badge graphic. You can use it in your social medias to sort of announce the completion of this particular enablement program. And we would love for you to give us a shout out on social media when you do so. Arvind's and my links to our social media profiles are out there.
I just want to add, I mean, and also, like we want to celebrate with you. Also, let us and let like others know what you found valuable today, like what
Yes,
you found usable. So as you are sharing this on LinkedIn or other means, apart from the text that we have here, just also share, are there any insights that you learned that will help your implementations or help your use of data cloud, Would
absolutely.
love to
Yeah.
hear from you guys.
And with that, that's it. We hope to see you at one of our later enablement sessions. If you need to get other people in your firm through this implementation expert program, worry not. There's a lot of other sessions. We hold these in different time zones many times throughout the month. So you can check out all of our partner enablement events in the partner learning camp to be able to access and join that next implementation expert session, whichever one that is. In the meantime, there's going to be lots of other ways. Stick close to Arvind and I on social as well as within our Slack community, and we'll continue to keep everybody updated on how to, continue to drive value with customers through a tool like Data Cloud. Thanks
Uh,
again. Yeah,
so a few questions on slides. So tomorrow you will get an automated email with the recap. So for all of you who have attended this session, uh, a link to the slides will be there, and it'll be in our partner community. Again, we are not, so use that to further your knowledge, but you will get that tomorrow from us.
sounds great. Thanks, Arvind. And with that, everybody, thanks for joining us, and we will catch you again at some future point down the road. See you all again soon.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks, everyone.
Record.